Welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Today we have a very special story for this little community. This story is about a retired man in black. A story that started with a new friendly neighbor, but everything changes after an intense morning discovery. I want to say that this story is not made by myself. I will post a link in the comments from the real story. Like and subscribe if you liked this story and it helped you found your peace. I am always excited to hear about your own stories, so don't feel like you are not being heard. Drop a comment. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Living in a duplex outside a medium-sized city in upstate NY, I'd been sharing the space with an unexpected pair of companions over the past year. James Martin, an older gentleman who could easily pass for 60 despite being in his 80s, and his adult son Robert, who seemed to have high-functioning Asperger's, moved in around the same time I did. We quickly bonded over music, specifically guitar playing. James was a walking encyclopedia of American music, and in just 1 year he taught me more about guitar than I'd learned in the previous 2 decades. Our friendship was deep but brief. One evening on the back porch, drinking bourbon and smoking cigars with guitars nearby, James announced they would be moving the next day. Their apartment was already packed, and despite my disappointment, I'm not someone who makes friends easily. He was cryptic about their destination. Having lost my father at 19, James had somewhat filled that paternal role for me. He reassured me they weren't becoming homeless, but simply starting a new chapter of life, though even he wasn't certain where that would lead. During our final goodbye, James gave me something both meaningful and challenging: sheet music for Hoager Carmichael's Stardust in a complex jazz chord melody style. His parting advice was intense and specific. Study every note as if under a microscope. When I chuckled and expressed doubt about my discipline, he was completely serious. To emphasize his point, he actually pulled out a microscope from one of his moving boxes and handed it to me. Then, after a few moments of farewell, he was gone, leaving me with an intricate musical challenge and a literal microscope to guide my practice. I discovered something incredible while examining a piece of sheet music. Out of boredom and frustration, I decided to look at the first note under a microscope, and what I found was astonishing. Tucked inside a tiny black dot was an entire page of writing that began, "My name is James Martin." Curiosity drove me to check every single note, and each black mark contained a different document. These weren't just random scribbles, but a deeply personal narrative revealing an insider's perspective on the US government's cover-up of alien contact. Some of the details matched actual UFO sightings I verified online, while others explained the reasons behind the extraterrestrial presence and why it remains such a closely guarded secret. The method of hiding information intrigued me. This technique, called a microdot, was a common intelligence tool during the Cold War, similar to microfilm and used extensively for covert communication. With hundreds of pages of documents, I spent 24 straight hours reading through them. The magnitude of information is overwhelming. I can't possibly document everything in one entry, and organizing this into a coherent narrative will take time. But if people are interested, I'll continue sharing these revelations. Perhaps that was Martin's intention all along. Here's a tantalizing preview. The famous Roswell crash wasn't an accident. It was deliberately staged. Piecing together this story involves sorting through a mix of classified documents and personal journals from Mr. 2, but testified documents resulting. Martin, the narrative begins with an unexpected source, a powerful radio station called XERA, operated by Dr. Tile of by Dr. Tile and RAA, John Brinkley, the infamous goat gland doctor. In September 1935, something remarkable occurred. Patsy Montana's live performance of Cowboy's Sweetheart became the first human voice detected by alien listeners. AM radio signals, which typically bounce between Earth and the ionosphere, can escape into space, especially at dusk and particularly with a 1,000,000-watt transmission. The signal's journey was long. It took over 2 years to reach the alien exploration ship, and another 4 years for the ship to reach our solar system. By the time they arrived, World War II was raging. The aliens strategically positioned themselves in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, finding everything they needed: cover, raw materials, and water from small planetoids like Ceres. Their first action was to deploy thousands of automated probes for a preliminary planetary survey. Allied pilots would later know these small spherical drones as Foo Fighters. The Roswell incident holds more complexity than most realize. Contrary to popular belief, 2 spacecraft crashed that night in 1947. One wreckage was found on Mac Brazel's ranch, while the second was discovered wedged in an arroyo on the plains of St. Augustine. Both ships had severely damaged hulls, with alien bodies found inside and around the wreckage. 4 bodies were contained in what appeared to be escape pods. At the St. Augustine crash site, 1 alien was reportedly still alive when soldiers arrived. Despite subsequent myths, this survivor lived only a few more days. Army intelligence was deeply troubled by the mysterious crash, with several unsettling details emerging from their initial investigation. The sources recovered were remarkably small, lacking the expected supplies for a long interstellar journey. Clearly, they must have had some form of support system, something like a mothership, yet no rescue attempt was made. One document starkly described the scene as being left like so much trash in a foreign wasteland. The absence of any rescue effort was particularly striking. The aliens had days to retrieve their technology, or fallen crew members before the army even became aware of the crash, but chose to do nothing. This behavior reminded the intelligence analysts of the recent kamikaze pilots, suggesting these beings operated under a fundamentally different moral code that seemed to place little value on individual life. The investigation took an even more intriguing turn when analysts discovered the sources hadn't simply crashed, but had collided with each other at extremely high speeds. This collision proved fortunate for the investigators. In 1947, they lacked the technology to penetrate the source's hulls had they remained intact after a ground crash. The hull damage from the mid-air collision was the only reason they could examine the craft's interior. The circumstances seemed almost too convenient. Advanced spacecraft capable of interstellar travel, somehow managing to crash into each other, and then being left abandoned in a remote location near a major military base. Each detail raised more questions than answers, leaving Army intelligence both frustrated and deeply curious about the true nature of these mysterious visitors. During World War II, a breakthrough in understanding came when an analyst drew parallels between the Roswell crash and counterintelligence techniques, specifically Operation Mincemeat. This wartime strategy involved a clever deception where a dead homeless man was dressed in a British naval uniform and set adrift to wash ashore in Spain, carrying false invasion orders targeting Greece and Sardinia. The operation successfully misled the Germans. This comparison sparked a radical theory. The Roswell crash might have been intentional. The aliens didn't retrieve their equipment and personnel because they wanted them to be discovered, specifically by the US military. What appeared to be escape pods could actually be protective containers designed to ensure alien bodies remained intact for study even after such a catastrophic impact. The fact that one being was still alive made the scenario even more chilling. Eisenhower's first encounter with the aliens was nothing short of extraordinary. Martin's account, the only existing record of the meeting, describes an interaction that defies conventional understanding. This was a momentous event, an alien race making direct contact with a human, using available information about humanity and demonstrating their power in a way that deeply impressed Eisenhower. Martin was particularly struck by Eisenhower's capabilities. He believed Ike was the perfect leader for that moment in history, a man who had won the world's largest war by understanding his opponents and then negotiated planetary borders with the most cunning leaders of the past millennium. His background, growing up in the remnants of the Old West and learning poker from retired cowboys, had shaped him into a formidable strategist and negotiator. In November 1954, an unusual invitation appeared on Ike's desk, written on the mysterious metal foil everyone knows, the kind that springs back to its original shape no matter how much you crumple it. The message was direct. You have our craft, which crashed in your southwestern desert. We invite you to meet with us the 11th of February 09 Ceres, 32 DG109 N16 DG16, 23W with the coordinates pinpointed Holloman Air Force Base. After 7 long years of speculation since Roswell, and amid various unexplained incidents, Eisenhower was about to meet the aliens. Of all presidents, he was likely the most skilled at international negotiations. February 1955 arrived. Ike's plane touched down around 7 a.m., and they waited on the tarmac. At 9 a.m., Holloman radar tracked 2 discs approaching slowly. They decelerated further as they entered the base's airspace. One disc landed roughly 50 yards from the president's plane, while its companion hovered silently overhead. A door opened underneath the landed craft, extending a ramp. Ike walked across and entered. What happened next defied expectations. Instead of a small, bug-eyed creature, Ike was greeted by a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man in white who introduced himself as Alan. The alien looked startlingly human and oddly familiar. The ship's interior was equally surprising. No controls, buttons, or displays. Just smooth white walls that seemed to glow, with seats and a table molded directly from the floor. A pitcher of water and a glass sat on the table. Most surreal was the soft music playing, Tommy Dorsey's Stardust, Ike's favorite song. They had chosen this tune deliberately, hoping to establish a connection with Eisenhower, showing a deep reverence for the musical masterpiece. The human negotiator sitting across from Ike was carefully crafted to seem familiar. They knew his favorite song and shared his love of westerns, even modeling their appearance after Alan Ladd, a classic genre actor. A soft holographic mask covered their face, generating perfect expressions and features with computer-generated voice technology. Eisenhower insisted the disguise was so seamless that encountering such a being on the street would reveal nothing unusual. The implications were significant. They could create an undetectable human-like being, gain access to sensitive spaces, and demonstrate an uncanny knowledge of personal details. This mask represented more than just a technological marvel. It hinted at the theatrical nature of the entire encounter. Yet the man remained composed. During that first meeting, Ike discovered fundamental misunderstandings about alien exploration. Humans typically operate under what Martin's agency calls the Columbus paradigm, imagining space travelers as adventurous explorers like Captain Kirk, equipped with faster-than-light warp drives. But this perception is fundamentally incorrect. The reality is far more complex. The light speed barrier remains absolute, and while alien technology is extraordinarily advanced, pushing physical boundaries, they still cannot exceed light speed. Interstellar travel requires enormous time investments. Their civilization confronted a critical challenge, possessing technology to traverse solar systems, yet lacking the means to do so independently. Consider the human element. While some individuals might commit to a lifetime of space travel, no one would willingly condemn their children to such an existence. This constraint shaped their entire approach to exploration and technological development. The crew members found at Roswell are a unique blend of clone and android, operating with a collective artificial intelligence. They developed self-replicating probes designed to explore other solar systems and transmit data back to their home planet. When a probe discovers an interesting location, it immediately fabricates another probe to continue the mission while the original begins its investigation. During the Roswell body dissections, researchers found a small black carbon sphere about the size of a golf ball embedded in the brain tissue. Initially thought to be an organ, it was actually an incredibly advanced computer with nerve connections. This design allows for a biologically based android that can self-maintain and be easily grown in a tank when needed. Their civilization has reached a technological level where traditional resources like labor, food, and minerals have become nearly worthless. With unlimited energy and artificially intelligent androids capable of building spaceships and anything else required, their economy functions differently. Clones are sent out to gather resources while rare metals are routinely retrieved. In this advanced society, data has become the primary currency. Their economic system revolves around information exchange across multiple planets with varying technological capabilities. They trade data just as we would exchange money, making information the most valuable commodity in their interconnected galactic network. The probes serve a crucial role in this system, systematically collecting and transmitting valuable information back to their home planet. When encountering new civilizations, these adaptable androids can establish connections and gather critical data, expanding their knowledge base and economic opportunities. The aliens struck a deal that allows them to study us secretly and without interference. In exchange, they promise to protect Earth from space threats like asteroids and share information about their civilization. However, two key issues troubled Eisenhower. First, they would not share any advanced technology. While we could keep crashed sources for study, we wouldn't receive help understanding them. Ike had hoped for a technology exchange that would strengthen the US position in the Cold War, making this a significant letdown. The second concern was even more serious. The aliens were taking control of nuclear weapons technology worldwide, ensuring that neither the US nor the Soviet Union could launch a nuclear strike. Since that time, cloaked drones have been stationed at nearly every nuclear site designed to detect and neutralize any potential nuclear attack. Eisenhower was uncomfortable with a foreign power controlling US defenses, but he was told this arrangement would remain in place regardless of negotiation outcomes. Their interest in humanity stems from the rarity of our circumstances. While life might be common in the universe, intelligent life is less frequent, and a high-functioning civilization is even rarer. What makes Earth truly unique is our planet's potential to support continued advancement and space exploration. This requires a delicate balance, being in the Goldilocks zone, having water, a protective magnetic field, and sufficient energy sources. to propel civilization forward. The aliens found our initial oil exploration fascinating, and they're particularly intrigued by our current energy challenges. Beyond our physical potential, they're captivated by human creativity, especially our music, which they consider among the most impressive of known civilizations. Essentially, we're like Sutter's Mill during the 1849 gold rush, an incredibly valuable source of rare and precious data that they're eager to study and understand. The government's pursuit of secrecy stems from a desire to preserve the integrity of the data collected about alien civilization. Like a scientific experiment, where introducing an observer alters the results, knowledge of alien contact fundamentally changes human behavior. If people knew they were being studied, their actions would become inherently artificial and skewed. This rare information represents a potential economic and technological roadmap for humanity's future. By maintaining strict confidentiality, authorities can continue gathering unfiltered insights into an advanced civilization, essentially creating a blueprint for our potential development. A significant additional agreement was reached, details of which will be shared in a future narrative. Before diving into the operational details of Martin's agency, understanding Martin as a person provides crucial context. Some of these insights come directly from his personal journals, while others were shared during casual conversations, snippets of conversation exchanged while sitting together on the back porch. I'm contemplating the need for trigger warnings in upcoming installments. Some forthcoming content may include descriptions of violence, potentially referencing historical atrocities like those from the Holocaust. Guidance on handling such sensitive material would be appreciated. James was born in Harriman, Tennessee, the youngest of 9 children. When he was 8, tragedy struck. His father, a railroad worker, was found dead from exposure along the tracks he worked, a detail that suggested, though unspoken, a likely death from alcoholism. The loss meant the end of the family's income, forcing a harsh separation. Older daughters were quickly married off, while the children were distributed among relatives who could take them in. Martin, being the youngest, was essentially abandoned. An orphanage in Knoxville became his home until age 11, when he ran away and hitchhiked to Dayton to live with a married sister. His stay was brief, and he soon returned to Knoxville without explanation. At 13, he was adopted by a childless couple who needed farm help. Fortunately for James, they turned out to be kind. His new adoptive father, a country music enthusiast, gifted him his first guitar shortly after he arrived. The military became James's new family when he enlisted at 18. Career changed him as it did many combat veterans. While he rarely spoke about his specific experiences, the impact was evident. An aptitude test revealed his near-genius IQ, which quickly steered him into intelligence work. His military service deeply shaped his worldview, instilling a profound sense of patriotism and a commitment to serving his country's ideals. This commitment ultimately led him to accept a job with an intelligence agency. Yet, as he became more involved, he found himself increasingly conflicted about the organization's methods, a tension born from his deeply held principles and the complex realities of national service. He was that old-timer with a century's worth of stories, jokes, and advice on women, dropping them casually between song breaks or during our shared meals. As a neighbor, he was simply a great guy, a walking encyclopedia of American music who could even play like Chet Atkins. His musical credentials were impressive. He'd been to the first Bean Blossom Bluegrass Festival, Newport Folk Festival in 1964, New Orleans Jazz Festival multiple times, and practically every historic music event you could imagine, though he never made it to Woodstock. Robert would sometimes play along with brushes on a snare drum and hi-hat that James had set up. His rhythm was rock solid, a steady boom chink that might have lacked swing but always worked perfectly for us. When the weather turned cold, we'd move inside near his portable electronic fireplace. Our outings often involved wandering through that quirky part of town every small city seems to have, or sitting in the park watching people go by. These trips always included a stop at a small liquor store owned by 2 brothers with unmistakable concentration camp tattoos on their forearms. James was deeply respectful of their history, exclusively buying his alcohol from them and frequently reflecting on their unimaginable childhood experiences during the Holocaust. His take was blunt. The Nazis, in his view, had gotten off far too easily. Martin was part of a unique military intelligence group that celebrated creativity. Drawn from various military branches, this team included artists, musicians, photographers, and theater professionals who pursued creative passions beyond their standard duties. A rigorous selection process whittled down the initial candidates, with Martin fortunate enough to be chosen for this groundbreaking assignment. The group's objectives were strategically complex. They aim to obscure the public understanding of unidentified flying phenomena while simultaneously assisting alien intelligence in their data collection efforts. The arrangement hinged on a remarkably clever negotiation. The value of intelligence exchanged between humans and aliens was directly proportional. In essence, the less public acknowledgement or acceptance of extraterrestrial presence, the more comprehensive and valuable the data trade would become. This meant that maintaining secrecy and uncertainty about alien interactions was not just a byproduct, but a deliberate and calculated approach to maximizing information exchange. The aliens had craftily designed a system where human skepticism and limited awareness would ultimately benefit both parties' intelligence-gathering goals. James and his team had various operations under their first objective, many of which seemed routine. One such task was mail duty, which involved crafting fake letters like fabricated editor submissions, false UFO sighting accounts, and witness testimonies that directly contradicted existing reports. They would then drive across the country, mailing these letters from towns where the alleged event supposedly occurred. Some operations made James increasingly uneasy. In a late 1950s mission, they sent a letter to a prominent UFO newsletter researcher. The letter described a young woman's encounter with tall, blonde aliens who claimed to be space brothers guiding humanity's spiritual evolution. They included a genuine photograph of a spacecraft, a deliberate tactic of mixing truth with deception. After mailing the letter, they bugged the researcher's phone and monitored his actions. When he called a meeting and shared the letter and photo with his research group, James and two colleagues visited the researcher. Dressed in black suits and displaying intentionally strange behavior, they demanded the materials and issued a vague, threatening warning against public disclosure. The researcher refused to comply. The next day, while he was at work, James and his team broke into his home and retrieved the original letter and photo. This carefully orchestrated scenario created a false narrative that would mislead researchers for years. Though the patriot in James believed he was serving his country, he felt conflicted about these tactics. Sending fake letters seemed different from invasive actions like phone tapping or breaking into a private residence without legal authorization. He continually reassured himself that no one was truly being harmed and that his actions ultimately benefited the nation. The agency needed more than mere letters and misdirection to shape public perception about UFOs. Their goal was to condition people's minds so that any reasonable person would instantly dismiss UFO sightings without further investigation. This psychological manipulation worked much like advertising and political messaging, exploiting existing human prejudices. To achieve this, they planned staged events under carefully controlled conditions, involving a collaborative effort between humans and aliens. The first such operation of its kind occurred on August 21, 1955, known in UFO circles as the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. For Martin, this was also his inaugural flight in an actual flying saucer. Preparation for the Kelly operation began 2 weeks before the incident. Agency operatives meticulously profiled local families, seeking a specific target that would perfectly fit media stereotypes. They wanted a family living slightly removed from town that could be easily portrayed as stereotypical clannish southern rural dwellers. After identifying the Sutton family, they conducted a week-long surveillance to understand their daily routines and behaviors. Martin's journal entry provides a vivid account of the mission. They transported me in a windowless plane for approximately 3 hours to an unknown remote airfield. Immediately upon landing, I was escorted directly to a waiting disc. Inside, 2 tall beings and 6 smaller ones were present. The smaller entities sat motionless, strapped into their seats, while the taller beings moved about, seemingly preparing for departure. I assumed the large seat was intended for me and settled in. As the door closed, a subtle hum and low vibration became perceptible. After being fitted with a headset, we quickly departed. Through the headset's eyepiece, I observed our journey from the southwest, rapidly approaching the Kentucky target area within minutes. Martin's reaction to the aliens wasn't typical for a first-timer. Early agent training involves exposure to alien clones to test psychological responses, with many recruits showing immediate terror and failing the program. Martin, however, remained calm. He was already familiar with the standard mission layout. 2 taller controllers, nicknamed Mom and Dad, and smaller aliens dubbed the Kids, whose numbers varied depending on the operation's requirements. His headset allowed him to scroll through multiple displays, including ship imaging and visual data collected by the alien clones. The mission unfolded dramatically. To ensure visibility, they illuminated the saucer like a carnival ride. which quickly drew the target's attention. One alien was spotted outside and rapidly retreated into the house. After landing, the operation commenced with military precision. The smaller aliens lined up as the lead alien distributed masks. Once activated, these masks transformed them into something out of a low-budget sci-fi film, creatures with exaggerated ears. They exited the saucer in a synchronized group, a scene Martin likened to children going trick-or-treating. What followed was systematic harassment. The masked aliens systematically terrorized the household, appearing and disappearing at will, peering through windows. The homeowners responded with escalating violence, eventually shooting out nearly every ground floor window. Martin grew increasingly uncomfortable, concerned about potential casualties and the unnecessary trauma being inflicted on unsuspecting civilians. The situation deteriorated until someone fled in a truck to summon law enforcement. Media coverage predictably sensationalized the event, strategically framing the account and witnesses to undermine credibility. This was a calculated effort to push UFO experiences into the realm of conspiracy and delusion, effectively discrediting such reports among educated and respectable circles. The agency's second mission involved aiding the Greys in collecting data, and their approach was brilliantly strategic. Biological entities with direct computer interfaces offered something extraordinary: genuine sensory experiences. The Greys weren't interested in mere photographs or measurements. They wanted rich, immersive data, the actual feeling of sitting in a concert hall, experiencing a Beethoven symphony among humans with all its nuanced sensations. These weren't just recordings, but complete experiential snapshots that represented true wealth and power for their civilization. During Eisenhower's negotiations, the human cloning proposal sparked intense debate. Some advisors were deeply uncomfortable, while others viewed the potential clones clinically, essentially as sophisticated biological machines without genuine human identity or consciousness. The meat puppet perspective ultimately prevailed, and the Greys quickly launched their human clone production program, creating bodies with distinctive black golf ball-like brains. By 1960, the program was well underway. Critically, this wasn't about abductions. Military physical examinations provided ample human DNA. A single 5 milliliters blood tube could potentially generate hundreds of clones. Contrary to cinematic depictions of instant adult generation, these alien agents entered the field as what humans would perceive as 5-year-old children, carefully and methodically integrated into their environments. Agents worked closely with hybrid companions that resembled 5-year-old children, accompanying them to various venues like theaters, concerts, museums, and restaurants. These interactions were part of the Greys' broader mission to collect experiences. Female agents were typically chosen to minimize suspicion, though some male agents, like Martin and Robert, were also paired with hybrids. Martin's relationship with the Grey intelligence seemed special. A unique loophole in their agreement prevented the Greys from negotiating with nations, but not with individual humans. This allowed Martin and the Grey intelligence to develop a personal connection beyond official channels. During evenings by the campfire, illuminated by a soft Coleman lantern, Martin learned fascinating details about alien history and philosophy. The hybrid civilization had undergone a significant transformation through cloning, developing revolutionary power technologies, starting with thorium and advancing to even more sophisticated energy sources. Their industrial-scale 3D printing capabilities had effectively made traditional government structures obsolete. In return for these profound insights, the Greys received something more mundane: a canoe trip and Martin's secret technique for grilling the perfect steak. This exchange highlighted the unexpected and sometimes quirky nature of their interactions. Their civilization's conflict with the government marked a turning point in their history, ultimately becoming the last of its kind and remarkably peaceful. Cities had emerged around thorium reactors, gradually refusing to pay traditional tributes. This was part of a deeper pattern: the long-standing relationship between people and institutions, typically defined by an exchange of money and labor for security, with governments consistently holding the advantage. However, technological advancement shifted this dynamic, tipping the balance of power towards the people. As bureaucratic systems weakened, they responded by creating increasingly stringent regulations and prohibitions. Yet these measures proved futile, a pattern consistent across all known civilizations when dealing with determined populations. The government's attempts to maintain control became less and less effective. Prohibitions were systematically ignored, rendering official mandates meaningless. Ultimately, the conflict dissolved without significant bloodshed. The clan city-states, showing unexpected compassion, provided the remnants of the government with their own city, and promised financial support until they could become self-sufficient. This resolution represented more than a simple political transition. It demonstrated a fundamental transformation in how societal power could be negotiated and redistributed, marking a peaceful evolution rather than a violent revolution. The shore of Lake Durant became a classroom where Robert unfolded a narrative about planetary transformation. Earth had fractured into independent city-states after the governmental era, now competing for data opportunities that made our world an unprecedented prize. The alien perspective on humanity was complex and nuanced. While humans might appear locked in perpetual tribal warfare, extraterrestrial observers understood this as a common stage of social evolution. Intelligence across civilized species shared a fundamental origin: predatory development. Only minds shaped by evolutionary selective pressures could reach the technological sophistication required for space exploration. What distinguished advanced civilizations was a profound capability. Species evolved to kill could simultaneously recognize the morality of restraint. This quality made humans remarkably similar to other developed worlds. The agency was transforming, driven by bureaucratic drift. Mission-oriented personnel were gradually replaced by individuals more concerned with organizational growth and personal advancement. Unnecessary operations emerged primarily to inflate budgets and career trajectories. Cattle mutilations exemplified these meaningless initiatives. Martin, now an elite within the organization, had transcended such mundane assignments. Yet another complication emerged in his professional landscape: Wilhelm Gruber. Rising rapidly through the ranks, Gruber represented more than just another ambitious bureaucrat. What truly distinguished him was a chilling background. He was a Nazi. Martin's dislike went beyond typical institutional rivalry, rooted in a deeper, more visceral recognition of Gruber's problematic history. During World War II, Gruber worked as a technician under Werner von Braun in the underground V2 rocket factory at Peenemünde. His time there was marked by direct involvement in war crimes against slave laborers, including a horrific incident where workers were hung from a work crane to intimidate others into working faster. A twist of fate saved Gruber from prosecution. An obscure memo found in von Braun's papers hidden in an abandoned mine ordered him to investigate Luftwaffe Foo fighter encounters. Von Braun, seeing little value in the investigation, assigned Gruber the most expendable team member. Though Gruber's investigation yielded no substantial findings, he craftily fabricated a story suggesting these encounters were of non-earthly origin. This narrative aligned with Allied intelligence, and Gruber was subsequently brought to Wright-Patterson in Ohio under Operation Paperclip's protection. Martin was particularly incensed that a war criminal not only escaped justice but became integral to what would be considered the most significant event in human history. Meanwhile, other Grey clans began appearing on Earth. With the lucrative contract for mining United States experiential data already secured, these groups predominantly emerged in regions like Africa, South America, and Eastern Europe, areas where witness credibility and communication limitations posed minimal risk to the American data collection. A more pressing development was unfolding on North American soil. Humans were being abducted at night by an unidentified clan demanding intervention. UFO encounter interpretations, as previously discussed, derive more insight from witness demographics than from aerial phenomena. The Kelly Hopkinsville case strategically selected witnesses the media could easily discredit, ensuring public skepticism. The subsequent staged encounter deliberately reversed this approach, targeting credible, educated, and liberal witnesses. Their objective was to assess the potential spread of UFO narratives through American culture and explore the believability of abduction stories. By 1960, the information landscape had become a battlefield where clans waged war without traditional violence. Clones had transformed conflict, making physical confrontation obsolete. Data was now the primary currency, with Earth, especially the United States, serving as a high-value target. A rival clan's strategy would involve seeding a complex alien mythology among Americans, knowing that stories with moral messages endure longer than random sightings. The objective was clear: create pressure through strategic manipulation, ultimately negotiating a data subsidy. Abductees were merely tools in this intricate information war, with human contact serving as the critical trigger. Every narrative element was carefully constructed, with no underlying truth beyond tactical advantage. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill represented Martin's most sophisticated operation. This was no chance encounter on a dark highway, but a meticulously planned event. Their selection was deliberate, their civil rights work and interracial marriage would resonate perfectly with educated, liberal Northeast audiences. Embedded within the narrative was a deeper strategic layer, a time bomb connected to the Zeta Reticuli star map. In 1961, no one could verify habitable worlds in that region. The story would spread, attracting academic interest before gradually losing credibility as future instruments would prove the map inaccurate. This was classic counterintelligence, one strategic falsehood nestled among truths. A specialized craft was constructed for the mission, its interior designed to match contemporary science fiction expectations. 2 exam rooms were prepared, and costumes carefully selected to align with public perceptions. The Greys would manage critical operational elements, piloting, tracking, providing physical presence, and managing subject movement. Martin's sole reservation was Gruber's role as mission controller. Surveillance was comprehensive. The Hills phone was tapped, with several couples under monitoring. However, they represented the first, truly clean operational window. In the days preceding their trip, the Greys covertly visited their home and modified their car, likely to enable tracking and subtly influence cognitive processes from a distance. The night unfolded with unexpected turns. The Hills were intercepted. Their car stopped multiple times until the terrain suited the operation. Both were rendered semi-conscious, with Barney placed in a deeper trance due to his size and strength. Betty could walk with assistance, while Barney required more help. The small Greys, despite their appearance, were surprisingly powerful. During this brief walk, Gruber targeted Barney with demeaning remarks designed to humiliate the couple. Martin observed, sensing the operation veering off its intended path. In separate exam rooms, Martin and Gruber proceeded with their respective tasks. The plan was straightforward: a mock medical exam, a guided tour, a brief speech, and the revelation of a star map. Memory technology would ensure Betty's precise recollection. A complication arose when Betty's dress zipper became stuck. As Martin stepped out to seek assistance, he witnessed a disturbing scene. Gruber had stripped Barney and was using technology to amplify psychological terror. This was far beyond the prescribed procedure. Martin immediately intervened, ordering the tall Greys to sedate Barney, dress him, and prepare for return. He completed Betty's examination according to the original script and had the couple revived in their car. Consequences followed swiftly. Martin faced suspension from fieldwork, while Gruber received a discreet reprimand. The bureaucracy prioritized avoiding scandal. Recognizing the potential threat, Gruber began maneuvering to remove Martin, who understood the agency's treatment of dispensable operatives. Over the next 2 decades, Martin and Robert moved continuously, gathering experiential data for the Greys in exchange for protection. Their financing came from off-world gold sources. Robert kept Martin informed about escalating tensions. A rival clan had likely recruited a human collaborator, most probably from within the agency, a suspicion later confirmed by the Greys. The pact with the Greys prohibited direct harm to humans, which meant Gruber's neutralization would fall to Martin. Their agreement remained in force, a delicate balance of cooperation and mutual survival. In the early 1980s, UFO sightings reached a peak during the Hudson Valley Flap. Hundreds of people witnessed elaborate formations that stretched over long periods. One pivotal abduction involved Martin, who knew Gruber was nearby and playing both sides. At a small private airfield, Martin found Gruber's team launching light-rigged planes designed to create fake sightings and confuse witnesses. When the planes were in the air, Martin confronted the 70-year-old Gruber, leaving a misleading clue before walking away. After his departure, the rival clan's presence in the region quickly faded, only to resurface later in Belgium. This is the story of my former neighbor, a man in black. Why share it now, when it could risk the first interstellar trade arrangement that brought humanity into a larger community? Martin's answer is straightforward. Americans deserve to know the truth. Technology has changed the landscape of UFO encounters. Everyone now carries a camera, making mass sightings less frequent and useful. The internet and the normalization of documenting experiences have lowered operational risks. Over the next decades, it might seem like these encounters have disappeared. Disclosure now carries little long-term consequence. However, people must understand what was set in motion at the end of World War II and how that legacy fundamentally reshaped clandestine services, creating a bureaucracy expert at managing public perception. When someone is targeting you with intimidation, there's a strategy that can help neutralize their power. If you find yourself confronted by foreign actors attempting to abduct or frighten you, your response matters. Directly confront them by asserting your awareness, clearly state that you know their identity, understand their purpose, and recognize their message as untrue. This approach makes you an ineffective target. By demonstrating you cannot be manipulated, these individuals will probably abandon their efforts and seek out more vulnerable subjects. I ride this late train from Chicago to Milwaukee so often that the route feels like second nature. Working downtown and living in the suburbs means I know every stretch of track, every industrial landscape sliding past the windows. That night was different. Thick fog made city lights bleed into the surrounding darkness. As we rolled through the east side's abandoned warehouses and empty lots, something unusual caught my attention. A vacant lot erupted with a strange light display, rows of precisely arranged lights forming a perfect diamond shape. These weren't random street lamps or security lights. They blinked in a steady, almost rhythmic pulse that seemed deliberate and unnatural. I was transfixed, trying to understand how these lights could exist in such an empty space. No buildings, no visible power sources, just this mesmerizing geometric pattern of soft, glowing points cutting through the fog. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost like a heartbeat. At the next small suburban station, where only a few passengers typically board or exit, a strange man entered. He moved with an unsettling precision, sliding into the seat directly across from me. His appearance was striking, a black suit so perfectly pressed, it looked almost unreal. A crisp white shirt with a stiff collar and a black tie that suggested a profession like funeral director or government agent. His features were equally remarkable. Dark, slick-back hair, a face so pale and smooth it seemed almost artificial. Without speaking, he reached into his jacket and produced a completely blank notebook. No markings, no writing, just a plain cover. Then he slowly slid it across the seat toward me. I blinked, confused. What could this mean? A little, voice low and quiet, almost a whisper. He wanted me to sketch something, but I didn't understand what. The train rattled on, fog thickening outside. When I glanced back at the window, the lights on the lot were gone. He watched me, expectant, eyes locked on mine. I picked up the notebook, feeling the smooth paper. I'm not an artist, I don't draw. But he smiled slightly, not reaching his eyes, and said, "Not what you think, just the lights, the pattern." The train grew quieter. Other passengers kept to themselves, earbuds in, heads down. So I opened the notebook and drew a rough diamond shape with a pen from my bag. It wasn't perfect, more like a kid's doodle, but the edges lined up. He watched without blinking. When I finished, he slid the notebook back. "Better," he said, "but not quite right. How do you want it then?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood as the train slowed near the next station. "Remember," he said softly, "sketch it differently." Then he was gone, disappeared into the crowd before the train stopped. I looked down, confused. For the rest of the ride, I kept glancing toward that vacant lot, but the lights never returned. Stations got emptier, fog never lifted. I sat holding the notebook with my shaky drawing inside. At home, I tried sketching again and again. Different shapes, different angles. Nothing matched what I saw. Every time I looked up, I felt watched, even alone. After a few days, black cars started parking outside my apartment. No license plates, tinted windows. Drivers never moved, just sat waiting. One midnight, I opened the notebook. The pages were blank, except for my drawings. But a faint glow seemed to pulse from the paper. Not light exactly, but something strange. Like a memory of those lights, I worked nights at Silver Pines Amusement Park, an abandoned place just outside a small upstate New York town. The owners paid for security to keep vandals away, so my shifts were usually quiet. Just me, occasional raccoons, and the distant highway hum. Late August brought a strange encounter. I was walking the perimeter fence that night, checking gates under a clear, cool sky where stars peeked between tall pines. The Ferris wheel stood dark and still against the horizon, its silhouette peaceful in the moonlight. Near the wheel, something caught my attention. At first, I thought it might be a drone or promotional light show, but this was different. Above the Ferris wheel, barely visible, was a circular craft hovering silently like it was watching the park. No blinking, no typical drone movement, just a steady glow blending with the night sky. The craft was perfectly round, maybe the size of a small car. No wings, no changing lights, just an unnatural stillness that made me freeze. I couldn't hear anything unusual, no hum, no buzz, just quiet. Then I blinked and it vanished. No flash, no sound, simply gone. My phone had no signal. Not a soul was around. The park was silent except for my footsteps on cracked pavement. The man wanted me to sketch it differently. I don't know what that diamond of lights really was or what it meant. Since that night, nothing about those rides felt normal anymore. Sometimes I consider showing the notebook to someone, a friend, maybe the police. But explaining sounds ridiculous. So I keep the notebook hidden, sketching when I can, always trying to capture the right shape, but never quite succeeding. And every time I draw, the feeling of being watched grows stronger. Some things, I've learned, don't want to be understood. The old Midnight Manor, the haunted house attraction, had been closed for years, a half-collapsed building with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. During one of my evening shifts, I noticed two men walking through the park's entrance. They were dressed identically, black suits, white shirts, black ties, and shiny black shoes, with neatly combed hair and serious yet calm expressions. As I greeted them, they simply nodded and continued walking toward the park's center. Curious, I followed at a distance. They headed directly to the abandoned haunted house and disappeared inside. When I looked back a minute later, they were gone, no footprints, no open doors, nothing. I spent the next hour searching the entire park, calling out and walking through every accessible area. The haunted house remained locked tight, with no way in without heavy tools. I tried to rationalize their disappearance, thinking they might be part of a maintenance crew I hadn't heard about. After that night, strange occurrences began to multiply. During my shifts, I noticed subtle, unsettling changes. The Ferris wheel sometimes appeared to be gently turning in the breeze, but when I approached, its gears were motionless. Shadows moved unnaturally too quickly, or in ways that didn't match their sources. Faint footsteps echoed behind me on empty walkways, yet no one was there when I turned. My radios would crackle with static before cutting out completely. Once, my flashlight flickered and died for a full minute, despite having fresh batteries. A few days later, I saw those same two men again. They stood near the entrance, perfectly still, watching me. My heart raced as I stopped walking, but they didn't move or acknowledge my presence. When I blinked, they vanished. No doors opened, no footsteps, just gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Was I imagining these events, or were my eyes playing tricks in the dark? The rest of my shifts passed without further incident, but I kept glancing up at the Ferris wheel, half expecting to see the mysterious craft again. It never returned. The park was a job like any other. Night shifts, quiet moments, an old abandoned space, but something felt different. More than just decay or darkness, there was a presence, a weight, a watching. I couldn't quit. The contract paid decently for a small town, so I kept showing up. Each night grew more intense. While checking the Ferris wheel base one evening, I discovered strange marks on the ground, circular indentations that didn't match any vehicle or animal prints. Heavy impressions of something oddly shaped. I photographed them silently. Another night, a flicker of light caught my eye inside the supposedly empty haunted house. Like an old lantern, I called out. Silence answered. The surrounding woods became strange. Whispers or wind with an unsettling rhythm, almost like communication. About a week later, the men reappeared near the Ferris wheel. One looked directly at me and muttered something barely audible. "This place doesn't belong to you." Then they vanished into the bordering trees. I finished that shift and went straight home. The next day, I resigned. I haven't returned since. Questions haunt me. What did those men want? What was happening around the Ferris wheel? Some larger plan or warning remained just beyond my understanding. Now, driving past where the park once stood, I sometimes glimpse faint lights moving through trees or a Ferris wheel turning in moonlight, but when I blink, only darkness remains. My life as a freelance wildlife photographer continues. A cabin in northern Minnesota's deep woods, miles from civilization. The river nearby. Late summer evenings spent waiting for herons and kingfishers. Just another day. The river bend had a wide, slow current that made it perfect for spotting wildlife. That evening was thick with stillness. The sky a faded orange-gray that demanded patience from any photographer. I'd been sitting on a fallen log with my camera mounted on a tripod, focused on the spot where tree shadows stretched long across the water. Hours of shooting had yielded mostly routine captures. Birds landing on branches, a beaver's leisurely swim. But when I started reviewing the images back home, something unusual caught my eye. Beneath the river's surface were dark, irregular shapes that didn't behave like typical underwater objects. They were smooth and matte, almost shadow-like, but more substantial, remaining completely stationary even as water currents shifted around them. Initially, I dismissed the shapes as a camera malfunction or lighting trick. I deleted those initial shots and continued sorting through my photographs. Yet curiosity pulled me back to the same location the next day. Under identical light and positioning, those strange forms reappeared. Zooming and changing angles revealed nothing more. They remained fixed just below the water's surface, unnervingly distinct. A friend laughed it off as river spirits, but something felt fundamentally wrong. 2 nights later, while editing photos on my laptop in my remote cabin, the quiet woods interrupted only by cricket chirps and river sounds, an unexpected visitor arrived. A car crunched up the gravel driveway, unusual given the late hour and isolated location. A man in a crisp black suit, polished shoes, and white shirt stepped out. He approached my porch without hesitation or invitation. When I asked if I could help him, his smile lacked warmth. "I'm interested in some photos you've taken," he said, producing a small notebook. He mentioned images capturing certain anomalies in the nearby river and requested to review my camera's memory card. Something in his demeanor made me step back, suddenly uncomfortable with this intrusive stranger. Here's the rewritten version. The camera sat warm in my hands as I tried to make sense of what had happened. A stranger had appeared at my remote cabin earlier, taking and returning the SD card with an unsettling warning. Water keeps its own secrets. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? No forced entry, no direct threats, just an eerie encounter that left me uneasy. The next day I returned to the river, searching for answers. Everything looked normal. Clear water, slow current. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those strange shapes were there again, lurking just beneath the surface. I captured several photos and later examined them closely on my laptop. The images revealed something peculiar. These shapes were solid yet dark, without reflection or texture. They simply didn't belong in the water. After that discovery, odd occurrences became more frequent. At night, quick movements between trees caught my eye, always too fast to identify. My phone would inexplicably die when I tried to communicate. The river itself seemed different. At dusk, a low humming vibration emerged near the spot where I'd been photographing. I mentioned these experiences to a few friends, but they dismissed my concerns as stress-induced imagination. Yet I knew something had fundamentally changed. The stranger's cryptic words echoed in my mind. Water keeps its own secrets. Since that encounter, I haven't returned to the river after dark. The mysterious shapes remain in my photographs, perpetually waiting just below the surface. The storm was breaking up as I drove back from chasing thunderheads about an hour outside Amarillo, Texas. My name is Rachel, and I've been a storm photographer for years, mostly freelance. It's not glamorous work, mostly cold nights and freezing fingers. But when you catch something rare, it's worth it. That day was different. While setting up near a dirt road off Highway 287, I noticed something odd through my long telephoto lens. I was focusing on a nasty-looking cumulonimbus with weird ripples along its edges, like waves on water. Suddenly, a small metallic shape darted through the clouds. It wasn't a plane or a bird, and it didn't leave any trail or noise, just a sleek, shiny object weaving effortlessly through the storm cells. I snapped a bunch of photos, adjusting focus and shutter speed, but the thing vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. When I checked the shots on my camera, the object was there, sharp and clear on the negatives. It looked like a dark disc, almost like a piece of polished metal, catching the last bits of sunlight. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I set up my small dark room in the basement, with a red bulb and some trays for developing film, working slowly and carefully with the chemicals. Something about this felt different. Now, the trees and riverbank feel strange to me. Sometimes when the wind is still and the river moves quietly, I swear I can feel something watching me. But when I turn, there's nothing but shadows. I keep thinking about that man in black and his warning about how some things are better left undisturbed. I'm not sure what the river is hiding, but I'm pretty sure it's not natural. I'm writing this because I want someone else to know. Maybe there's something out there paying attention to the quiet places we forget. Maybe some secrets are alive and they don't want to be found. I was developing photographs alone in my basement darkroom, the quiet broken only by a dripping kitchen faucet. While examining the contact sheets, I noticed something strange. A metallic blur twisting through storm-laden landscapes and lightning. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open behind me. When I turned, a man in a black suit stood in the red glow of the room. His pale face had sharp features, and he looked calm yet out of place. His eyes reflected the negatives with an unsettling clarity. He asked in a low, steady voice. I blinked, confused. He stepped closer, hands folded deliberately. Can a negative show something that isn't really there? Something that might never have been? I shook my head, uncertain. His gaze swept the contact sheets pinned to the wall. You've captured something, he said. Something people aren't meant to see. My stomach tightened. Who was this man? He smiled without warmth. I make sure certain images don't spread, he explained, his tone polite but commanding. I felt trapped, knowing I couldn't let him take the film. Why are you here? What do you want? I asked. He pulled out a plain white card with black text, barely readable in the dim light. We keep things quiet, he said. Destroy the negatives, and you won't be bothered. My heart raced. I wanted to refuse, to demand answers, but his calm certainty gave me pause. Just then, my phone buzzed upstairs, a message from Mike about breakfast. The man noticed my distraction. Think it over, he said, and then walked out, the basement door closing softly behind him. I remained in the darkroom, staring at the negatives. The images were real. I had proof, but so was he. I'd been into drone racing for a couple years, mostly local meets and online streams, with a decent setup and a group of racing friends. My name's Cole, and I live outside Amarillo, Texas, where wind farms spread out for miles like giant, slow-moving flowers. The wide open space near the biggest wind farm was perfect for our tracks. Those turbines towered above us, spinning lazily as we prepared our equipment. It was early May, dry but not yet blistering, with wind picking up just enough to challenge our drones without knocking them from the sky. I was testing a new camera on my Sparrow Mk2 racer, hoping to capture smooth racing lines and some cool shots of the turbine blades overhead. Around 7 p.m., just before dusk settled in, I launched the drone. The fading light still illuminated the orange and red tips of the turbines. Then strange things started happening. My camera gear would sometimes be slightly moved even though I was certain I'd left it untouched. Phone calls would drop or fill with static in certain house areas. Late at night, I'd hear soft footsteps outside the windows, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. A mysterious man in black had warned me, but who would believe such a story? The idea of reporting this to the police seemed ridiculous. One night I examined the negatives and discovered the metallic object was completely gone, not faded or scratched, but entirely missing from the frames where it had previously been. I checked the original digital camera backups, and the images remained the same, as if the object had never been captured. I still keep the developed photos, the man's card, and my camera in a box under my bed. When storm clouds gather and the wind is right, I wonder about chasing storms again. But something about that night and the man's question holds me back from pulling out the long lens. Maybe negatives can lie. Or perhaps some things are truly better left unseen. I weaved through the gates during the race, pushing the throttle up. Low passes and tight turns led me along the farm's edge, the sky stretching out above. Halfway through the run, something caught my eye on the drone's feed. Near the tallest turbine, a faint shape twisted upward almost like a slow-moving smoke ring hovering by the blades. At first, I thought it might be a lens flare or light trick. But the spiral was real, maybe a few feet across, definitely visible. I tried to track it with the drone, but just as I pushed forward, the signal started glitching. The image froze, and then the shape vanished completely, as if it had never existed. The drone itself remained perfectly functional, with no loss of control. Back on the ground, I rewound the footage to confirm what I'd seen. The spiral was right there in the raw video, crystal clear. I showed Marcus, who was as deep into drone technology as I was. We were both confused. No one in our group had ever witnessed anything like this near the turbines before. For weeks, the mysterious shape lingered in my thoughts. I returned to the track multiple times, but nothing unusual appeared. Just standard races, wind and static-filled radio chatter filled those sessions. About 3 weeks after the initial sighting, I arrived for a late afternoon practice to find the field nearly empty. A man in a black suit stood near the pit area, looking distinctly out of place. His polished shoes and formal attire contrasted sharply with the dusty, casual environment. Sunlight caught his sunglasses, turning the lenses into mirror-like surfaces. He introduced himself as Mr. Landry, his voice calm and seemingly He complimented my drone skills, mentioning he'd watched some races online. When I tried to probe about his origins or how he found me, he simply smiled and said he was interested in the finer points of competition. Our conversation lasted around 10 minutes, covering drones, piloting techniques, and the wind farm. Something in his manner suggested he knew more about the spiral incident than he was letting on, though he never directly addressed it. Just before leaving, He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to me. "This contains a copy of your last race recordings," he said with a cryptic emphasis on "except the last." The Pacific Northwest in mid-October can be a photographer's challenge. Days grow shorter, colder, with thick low clouds dominating the sky. I was working a freelance gig for an online magazine, chasing weather stories and local events. One evening I drove out to the coast near Toria, Oregon, hoping the rolling fog might provide some moody shots for my portfolio. At a small pull-out near the shore, I set up my camera as the brisk wind cut through my jacket. The horizon still held a dull orange glow, just after sunset, nearly dark but not quite. I was adjusting my lens, focused on capturing the shifting fog and water's rippling surface, when something caught my eye. A cluster of lights moved just below the clouds. Initially, I assumed they were fishing boats, but something felt off. The lights were too uniform, too steady, moving together like a single, deliberate shape. It was strange. Later, a man approached me. "Some courses shouldn't be won," he said, nodding slowly before walking to his black sedan with tinted windows and driving away without looking back. At home, I plugged in the USB and discovered something odd. The files matched my original streams, but the last hour of footage was missing. The timestamp showed continuous recording, yet a chunk was clearly cut out. My original files still had that hour intact. I reached out to local groups, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual at the track or seen a suited guy hanging around. No one had. Marcus suggested it might be some corporate or government surveillance of the wind farms, but he had no concrete proof. After that encounter, I changed my routine. I continued racing on weekends, but only in daylight and away from the turbines. The spiral never reappeared, and the man in black never returned. It felt like a subtle warning. I'm still unsure what "some courses shouldn't be won" means exactly, but it seemed like more than a simple threat. I'd stumbled upon something meant to stay hidden, and they ensured I understood the message. That line haunts me more than the shape of the missing footage. Some courses shouldn't be won. The fog rolled thick, and through its haze, I spotted something strange. 3 amber lights hung suspended in perfect triangular formation, each about the size of a street lamp. I lifted my camera and started shooting. These lights were rock-steady, unblinking, sliding silently beneath the cloud cover with an eerie precision. After about 5 minutes, the mist swallowed them completely. I waited, hoping they might reappear, but they didn't. Back in my hotel room, I examined the photos, zooming in on the cluster. The triangle was crystal clear against the cloudy background. I shared the images with friends who were into unusual phenomena, curious about their reactions. Days later, while walking through downtown Portland on a cloudy afternoon, a peculiar encounter unfolded. Near a bookstore, a middle-aged man in a crisp black suit caught my eye. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a 1950s corporate advertisement, with slicked-back hair and a clean-cut appearance. Without warning, he unrolled a large print right on the sidewalk. The triangular lights, blown up to almost 2 feet wide. "That's mine," I stammered. "How did you get this?" His response was cryptic and calm. "You saw the wrong part of the sky." Before I could ask what he meant, he rolled up the print and vanished into the crowd. Bewildered, I tried to call a friend, but my phone was acting strange. The battery was nearly dead, despite being fully charged that morning, and the signal was weak. That evening, I meticulously reviewed my photos again. Nothing but those 3 steady lights existed in the images. No planes, no drones, no flares. In the following days, something unsettling began to happen. Shadows seemed to move just beyond street lamps. Quiet footsteps echoed behind me when I was alone. Something wasn't right. Here's the rewritten version. I'm Tom Keller, 37 years old, and trains have always been my passion. My small upstate New York town sits near old industrial lines long forgotten by time. Tracks where rust consumes metal and weeds push through weathered wooden ties. Before dawn, one early fall morning, I headed out to explore an abandoned track running through woods near an old quarry. Local rumors spoke of strange lights in that area, which only heightened my curiosity. Something about the location felt different. The strange encounters started. Parked cars with tinted windows, silent strangers. At a gas station, a man in a black suit stood next to me, staring blankly before vanishing mysteriously while his pump continued running. I kept these experiences to myself, feeling slightly ridiculous. One evening at a nearly empty diner, surrounded by flickering lights and a rattling heater, cold drizzle falling outside, I spotted a figure across the street. Another man dressed in black, motionless under a street lamp, who eventually turned and disappeared into the misty night. Walking home, I felt increasingly uneasy. The city sound seemed amplified, street after empty street. When I checked my phone, a triangle photograph I'd taken had vanished, replaced by a blank grey sky image. I couldn't explain it. A local news report later mentioned unexplained coastal lights near Atoria around the same time I was there. Just vague reports from locals describing strange atmospheric phenomena. I haven't returned to that coastline since. Now, on foggy evenings, I sometimes catch glimpses of 3 faint, perfectly aligned light points moving silently beyond the clouds. And I can't help wondering about that man who stood on the sidewalk, holding my photo, telling me I was looking in the wrong place. I've never really talked about this before, but lately these memories have been weighing on me. Railroad tracks stretched out before me in the dim light before dawn. The eastern horizon was just starting to soften, creating that quiet, muted blue-grey moment when the world seems to pause. I had come seeking solitude, my camera, my only companion, wanting nothing more than to capture the morning's silent beauty. The air felt crisp and damp, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and moss. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked, the sound echoing in the stillness. Then something caught my eye about 100 yards ahead, something that didn't belong. Right on the tracks sat a strange craft, not a train car or truck, but something entirely different. It was roughly the size of a large car, shaped like a wingless airplane, with a surface smoother than brushed metal. No rivets, no seams, just a matte grey tone that almost melded with the misty landscape. No markings, no lights, just sitting there, utterly motionless. I froze. Something felt off, despite my usual calm. Carefully, I raised my camera and snapped a few pictures, trying to make sense of the object through the fog. Its shape was angular yet sleek, designed for sliding or hovering rather than rolling. Just as I was about to step closer, a sound broke the silence. A faint engine hum. Turning toward the road, I expected to see a maintenance crew. Instead, a black sedan appeared, stopping at the track's edge. A man emerged, tall, late 40s, dark hair slicked back, wearing an expensive charcoal suit without a tie. His face was unreadable, the kind of expression practiced to reveal nothing without introduction or preamble. He walked directly to me and spoke. Tracks lead to places you don't belong. Confused, I asked what he meant. His tone was serious, almost warning. It's not for casual visitors, he said, glancing at the mysterious craft. It's best you don't touch anything here. I tried to explain I was simply taking pictures, but his demeanor made it clear the conversation was over. I first noticed something odd that morning by the railroad tracks. A strange craft was there, its metallic surface gleaming in the early light. A man in a dark suit approached me, his demeanor calm but stern. He didn't seem aggressive, just firm when he told me I shouldn't be there. After a brief exchange, he walked back to his sedan and drove away without further discussion. As I watched, the craft slowly faded from view, obscured by thickening mist. Nothing remained except the empty rails and morning dew. I left feeling unsettled and intrigued, returning to the spot over the next few days to find no trace of what I'd seen. When I shared the story with friends, they were skeptical. Some suggested it was a military operation, but something felt different. There were no helicopters, patrol cars, or warning signs. Just an eerie sense that something was off. Strange occurrences began to multiply. During walks near the tracks, I'd hear phantom footsteps behind me. Turning quickly revealed nothing. Shadows would slip between trees, always just beyond clear view. My phone started behaving oddly too. Calls would drop unexpectedly, and photographs taken near the site came out blurred with inexplicable light streaks. Late one night while driving, I noticed headlights trailing me. The car matched my speed precisely, never overtaking me. At a stoplight, a black sedan sat behind me, the driver staring ahead silently. Even when I changed routes, the car followed me home before vanishing. Mysterious phone calls followed. Picking up revealed only silence, occasionally punctuated by slow, steady breathing before an abrupt disconnection. I stopped answering altogether. The memory haunts me. Those photos from that morning remain on my camera, a tangible reminder of an experience I can't explain. The man's parting words echo in my mind. Maybe there are places you're not meant to go. On quiet, foggy nights, I sometimes hear a faint hum, something sliding over phantom railroad tracks that no longer exist. Nestled in the hills, my work with a wildlife monitoring group involves tracking cougar and bobcat movements. We use motion-activated cameras strategically placed along old service roads and game trails. It's a job that demands patience and silence, qualities I appreciate. That late July morning was bone dry and still. Around 6:30 a.m., I began hiking up to the ridge, my boots crunching gravel with each step. Insects buzzed around me as I made my way to check 4 trail cameras spaced roughly a mile apart. The first 2 cameras yielded typical footage: deer, a coyote, and a fox wandering through. The third camera had a dead battery, which I quickly replaced. The fourth camera was positioned in a particularly interesting spot, a narrow draw where we discovered mountain lion prints the previous spring, situated between 2 towering ponderosa pines overlooking a low clearing. When I examined the SD card on my tablet, I noticed the last recording was from 2 nights earlier. At 2:17 a.m., the video showed the usual nighttime grainy footage with branches swaying in infrared. Suddenly, the treetops began illuminating with an intense white light beyond moonlight. The camera struggled to adjust its focus. Just above the trees, a dark, egg-shaped blur hovered motionless, about 10 to 15 feet above the canopy. It wasn't moving like a drone or drifting, just suspended in place. After approximately 6 seconds, it rose slowly and disappeared from the frame. No animals appeared afterward, and the camera remained inactive for the rest of the night. I replayed the clip multiple times, squinting and hoping to rationalize the image as a lens smudge or light anomaly. But after 5 years of reviewing trail footage, I knew this was different. I'd seen countless environmental variations: bugs, bats, fog, snow, smoke, and this didn't match any of them. Finishing my review, I packed my gear and drove to the ranger station near Wilson Creek. It was a small concrete building next to the fire lookout garage, typically unstaffed in the morning. I planned to show Mike, the district ranger, the footage when he was available. Upon arrival, something seemed off. A plateless black SUV was parked beside the shed, and someone was already inside the building. I nearly backed into the vehicle, struck by an unexpected sense of unease. I pulled into the station, noticing the SUV with completely blacked-out windows. The front door stood open, which struck me as odd since Mike was usually strict about keeping it closed to maintain the air conditioning and keep bugs out. Stepping inside, I immediately froze. A stranger was standing behind Mike's desk, rifling through a stack of printer paper. He was tall, around 6'2" inches, dressed entirely in black, suit, tie, and dress shoes. No ranger badge or patch was visible. His dark hair was slicked back, and his skin had an unusual grayish tone, not quite pale, but looking like he'd been under fluorescent lights for far too long. When I entered, he turned with a blank, almost disinterested expression. "Is Mike around?" I asked. He nodded once and replied, "He's off-site." Then he gestured to the printouts and asked, "You're with the Wildlife Survey, correct?" Before I could respond, he picked up a black and white thermal photo, one of my elk crossing a creek from a week ago. Surprisingly, this was an image I hadn't yet uploaded to the shared drive. "Who are you with?" I demanded. He offered just the slightest hint of a smile. "We work parallel to your department. You don't need to be concerned." His voice was peculiar, flat and low, as if carefully controlling each word. He mentioned reviewing my recent capture from Unit D4, the camera I had just hiked to, another piece of footage not yet shared. From a side table, he retrieved a manila folder and handed it to me. Inside were grainy printouts, stills from my video showing treetops, a shape above them, and a strange light. "We'll ask that you redirect your research efforts away from the upper ridge for the remainder of the season," he stated clinically. When I pressed about what might be happening up there, he simply warned, "If you've seen anything unusual, we recommend you do not share those details outside of your team." I explained we were just volunteers without a formal team, but he offered no further response. I left the folder on the desk and walked out. The SUV was already gone when I looked back from the parking area, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. Late September last year was when it happened. I do wildlife tracking part-time in the Bitter Roots, mostly using motion-activated cameras to monitor migration patterns and track predators. I'm not a ranger, just a freelance contractor for the state's seasonal work. My name's Amanda Keller, and I live down in Darby, Montana, covering the south end of the range. It's a quiet area where you rarely see anyone outside of hunting season. That morning, I hiked out around 6 a.m. to check 3 trail cams near Pyramid Ridge, a real remote spot that takes a couple hours to reach from the access road. You have to cross a shallow stream and bushwhack through terrain that was logged back in the 90s, creating these weird openings surrounded by second-growth forest. It's great for tracking animal movement, especially cougars. The first 2 cameras were fine. I caught a bear near a salt lick and a couple of elk moving at night. The third camera was mounted about 15 feet up a pine overlooking a ridge drop-off. I use a telescoping pole to swap out the SD card, and when I loaded it into my tablet, I was expecting the usual wildlife shots. Instead, the third clip from 2:41 a.m. 2 nights before stopped me cold. The tree canopy below was waving slightly in the wind. Then the light changed. Not brighter exactly, but different. That afternoon, I tried uploading the clip to our shared drive when my tablet crashed. The entire system went dark, taking 2 hours to restart. When it finally did, the SD card was blank. No files, and I hadn't backed them up yet. 2 days later, I drove back to recheck the camera. The unit was missing. Zip ties cut, mounting post gone, with no note and no signs of damage to the tree or animal interference. We rotate cameras frequently, but no one from my group had been up there. When I emailed Mike about who had access that morning, he simply said he was on fire watch all week and nobody had his keys. I haven't brought it up again. Sometimes I drive past the canyon trailhead and think about hiking up there, but I never do. The last time I was near that slope, I swear I heard something above the trees, just a soft mechanical hum, like electricity in the air. I didn't look up. The camera's infrared filter glitched as I spotted something hovering just above the tree line. Not a typical craft with blinking lights or sharp edges, just a dark oval, maybe the size of a minivan, suspended silently. No movement, no sound. It didn't reflect light or cast a shadow, simply there. For 10 seconds it lingered before rising straight up, leaving no trace on the surrounding trees. After the clip ended, the camera recorded nothing else for the rest of the night. Unusual, since that's typically when most activity occurs. I rewatched the footage repeatedly, adjusting contrast and slowing it down. This wasn't a bird, bat, or fog. My experience told me that much. I downloaded the clip, labeled the file, and hiked back down. My plan was to check with the rangers about potential weather balloons or drone surveys in the area. The ranger station was about 30 minutes from the trailhead, a small building with a garage and shortwave tower, usually staffed by 3 people. When I arrived around 11 a.m., a black SUV without markings or plates was parked outside. It looked federal but not like a typical fish and wildlife vehicle. Inside, the main office was silent. No one sat at the front desk. I knocked on the open door to the records room and stepped in. A man I'd never seen before stood behind the computer terminal. Tall and thin, he wore a dark suit and black tie despite the nearly 80-degree heat. His skin seemed colorless, like a photo with its saturation turned down. Jet black hair was combed flat to the side, and he didn't acknowledge my entrance. "Hey, I was looking for Ranger Daly. I've got some footage you might want to see," I said. He turned slowly, as if suddenly remembering my presence. His eyes were unnaturally still, unblinking. "She's in the field today. You can leave your report here," he responded. His voice was too soft, almost like a poorly dubbed voiceover. I hesitated, tablet under my arm. Then he asked, "Is this regarding the anomaly recorded on September 18th to..." I hadn't told anyone about that. I didn't understand what was happening. The man had been calm, eerily so, when he told me to redirect my research efforts. His smile wasn't genuine, more like a practiced imitation of human emotion. "Who's we?" I had asked. He didn't respond, just stared, and then resumed typing on a screen I couldn't see. Back at my truck, something felt off. The SUV's back hatch was slightly open, revealing neatly stacked black cases with no labels. I left quickly. That night, everything went strange. The video clip I tried to load was blank, same file size, same timestamp, but just a black screen with no sound or static. When I attempted to copy it to my desktop, the system froze, requiring a hard reset. After restarting, the file had vanished completely. 2 days later, I discovered my camera was gone from the ridge. No signs of damage, no animal interference, just carefully removed, with zip ties still attached to the tree. I reached out to other trackers who used that area, but none had touched it. I logged a note, but no one followed up. My phone started acting weird that week. Calls dropped constantly, the screen froze, and the compass spun erratically. I initially blamed mountain signal issues, but it continued even in town. 3 days after the ranger station encounter, I spotted the same black SUV parked across from a closed antique store in Hamilton. No driver, engine off, just sitting there. I waited 10 minutes, pretending to check receipts, but it didn't move. I've kept cameras in other forest areas, but I haven't returned to Pyramid Ridge, not out of fear, but because I don't want to see that man again or whoever might accompany him. His unsettling quiet suggested something wasn't right, something beyond my understanding. That winter, I was renting a small converted woodshed behind a farmhouse in northern Vermont, just outside Glover. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed a cheap, quiet place to regroup. I'd been diving into backyard astronomy, working with a used 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope mounted on a skywatcher, mainly observing star fields and meteor showers. My observation setup was simple: a plywood platform behind the cabin, far enough from town to avoid light pollution. The winter nights up there offered some of the clearest skies I'd ever seen. On a Tuesday, which happened to be the night I got clearance to work remotely for a Portland graphic design firm, I celebrated with a beer and grilled cheese before turning my attention to the Orion Nebula. Around 1:30 a.m., while scanning near Betelgeuse, something unusual caught my eye. The star to the northeast, one I'd noticed before, suddenly blinked. This wasn't a typical atmospheric distortion, but a distinct, hard blink. Gone, then back. Then it flickered in an almost rhythmic pattern. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then nothing. I spent the next hour locked onto this spot, trying to replicate what I'd seen. I checked my notes, lenses, power source, and swapped eyepieces, but couldn't recreate the phenomenon. Eventually, I logged the experience and chalked it up to fatigue, or a trick of light. 2 nights later, something else happened. My observatory was just a window with a blackout panel, allowing me to keep the telescope inside and open it to the cold without flooding the room with light. Around 2 a.m., half dozing at my desk while waiting for cloud cover to clear, I noticed movement through the curtain's gap. A man was standing completely still, just beyond the tree line. There was a person standing outside my observatory, maybe 30 feet away, tall and thin, wearing a black overcoat and dark slacks. His skin looked almost bluish in the moonlight. No gloves, even in the snow. He was using his own telescope, a black tube on a matte black tripod, with no markings I could see. At first, I thought it might be a prank, someone from town messing with me. But there were no footprints in the fresh snow that had fallen earlier that afternoon. Nothing disturbed the pristine white surface. I watched him for about 10 minutes. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't adjust the scope or take notes. Just stood there, eyes fixed to the eyepiece like he was watching something intently. Eventually, I closed the blackout panel and sat on the floor, unsure what to do. Calling the police seemed ridiculous. When I looked again just before dawn, he was still there. By sunrise, he had vanished. No tracks, no scope, no trace he'd ever been present. 2 days later, I found something taped to the observatory window, a piece of black paper, bookmark-sized, with a perfect white circle centered on it. No tape edges, no moisture damage despite the snow. It wasn't there when I went to bed. I left it alone for hours. I knew it had disappeared. No wind, no footprints. Strange occurrences followed that week. The cabin's power flickered but never fully failed. My telescope mount began drifting slightly off-center, no matter how often I recalibrated. One night I found the scope turned toward the woods, though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering, not voices exactly. More like a mechanical hum just low enough in frequency that I couldn't tell if it was in the air or in my ears. It only happened at night. I tried recording it, but the playback always came out blank. One night I heard footsteps crunching snow around the cabin, a slow, methodical circle. I shut off the lights and waited. When I opened the door, the yard was empty. The cabin became my fortress. I sealed the blackout panel, taped it from the inside, and moved the telescope indoors, locking the window tight. A knife now rested by my bed, something I despised, but an instinct I couldn't ignore. Something was watching. On my final night, the stars vanished, not hidden behind clouds, but simply absent from the sky. Around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to check the satellite dish after a dropped connection. The sky was clear and moonless, yet completely dark, a pitch-black void. I waited 15, then 20 minutes. Suddenly the stars returned, exactly as they had been, same positions, same brightness. Before sunrise the next morning, I packed everything into my truck and left. No goodbyes to the farmhouse owners, no explanations, just driving. A year has passed, and the telescope remains untouched. The incident happened on I-25 south through New Mexico, somewhere between Las Vegas and Truth or Consequences. Late April, around 3:30 a.m., the road was nearly empty, with only occasional northbound trucks breaking the silence. I'd been driving for 9 hours, hauling steel coils to El Paso, planning a quick stop at a truck stop near Socorro for coffee and rest. Weather conditions were perfect, dry and clear, cool enough to skip the AC, but not cold enough for the bunk heater. Old country ballads crackled on the AM radio as I cruised, the drive blending into a monotonous landscape of dotted lines and exit signs. Then I saw the overpass. This stretch was familiar, a long curve leading to a structure typically visible half a mile ahead. silhouetted by my own headlights. But something was different this time. Something perched atop the overpass caught my eye. Initially, I mistook it for highway equipment or a crane. As I drew closer, I realized it was something else entirely. A flat, wide shape, low to the surface. A perfect matte black triangle, seemingly perched rather than parked. No lights, no markings, nothing reflective. I eased off the gas, letting the truck coast. Some inexplicable instinct made me hesitate to drive underneath. When I was about 100 yards away, I blinked. And just like that, it was gone. Not flying away, not gradually disappearing, but simply absent. The desert stretched out endlessly, and something felt off. I stopped the truck right in the middle of the lane with no other vehicles around. The engine idled softly as I flipped on the hazards and stepped out. I walked a few feet away and climbed the embankment, scanning the overpass and the surrounding road. Nothing unusual caught my eye. No tire tracks, no fresh scuffs, just empty road and vast emptiness. I lingered there longer than intended, maybe 15 minutes before returning to the truck. An unsettling silence had settled in, and even the radio had dissolved into static. I drove on until I reached the Flying J at the edge of Socorro, parking around back and cutting the engine. Grabbing a sandwich from the cooler, I went inside to stretch my legs. The place was eerily quiet. Just an old guy at the register and a few drivers dozing in the lounge. I settled into a corner booth, facing the window with my food and coffee. I wasn't hungry. I just needed a moment to shake off the strange feeling that had been following me. That's when he appeared. I hadn't noticed him enter. Without a word, he slid into the booth across from me. Clean-shaven and pale, he wore a crisp black suit and tie that looked freshly pressed. No jacket, no bag. His hands were folded neatly on the table, and bizarrely, his shoes looked polished, despite being in the middle of a desert truck stop. Initially, he stared past me out the window, watching the fuel pumps. Then, without blinking, he spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. Routes change when you watch the sky. My coffee hung suspended halfway to my mouth. He finally looked directly at me and added, "You didn't drive under it." When I asked what he meant, he simply stood and walked out, not hurriedly, but with a calm purpose, as if he had completed his task. Driven by curiosity, I followed him outside. The parking lot was empty, except for a few trucks and a fuel tanker. The man had vanished. I asked the cashier if anyone else had come in. He looked puzzled and said no one had entered in the last half hour. Checking the security camera monitor, I watched the feed cycle through the lot, pumps, diner area, and front door. Strangely, the man was nowhere to be seen, not entering, not leaving. I've been running the midnight ferry out of Port Townsend for 11 years now, and there's a story I don't usually share. It was a Thursday night in early May, clear skies, water smooth as a mirror. We were on the late run, me and Eli, my deckhand, with a handful of passengers heading to Whidbey Island. We left the dock around 12:05 a.m., about 10 minutes behind schedule due to some late arrivals. By 12:20, most passengers had gone inside. The night was chilly but still, with no wind or waves. Everything was quiet. The engine hummed, ropes creaked, and Eli was messing with his vape behind the cabin while I sat in the wheelhouse, autopilot engaged, scanning ahead, as I always do. About 2 miles from the island, something caught my eye off the starboard side. A glowing orb, bluish-white, basketball-sized, hovering about 6 feet above the water's surface, but wasn't flying like a drone, but gliding smoothly, moving in perfect sync with our ferry. Whenever I'd slow down or adjust the rudder, it matched our movements. No sound. Initially, I thought it might be a weird light reflection, but when I stepped out to the side deck for a better view, it was still there, skimming the water effortlessly. I called Eli up, not revealing what I'd seen, just asking him to look. He leaned over the railing and froze. "You seen that?" I asked. He nodded, whispering, "What the hell is that?" We watched it for about a minute before it veered away sharply, a 90-degree turn with no arc, just sudden and precise. Years later, I found myself driving to El Paso, constantly catching strange glimpses in my side mirror. Shadows that didn't align with the road, flickering lights in the hills. At 5 a.m., I passed a black SUV on the shoulder, headlights off, with a driver wearing sunglasses. I didn't report it. Who would believe me? I've driven that route countless times since. The overpass remains unchanged. But now, I don't slow down when I pass underneath. I just keep my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I zipped out over the water, climbing quickly to about 30 feet before shooting straight into the clouds and disappearing without a trace. No sound, no trail, nothing. I didn't report it. I've seen weird lights out here before, so I figured it might be some experimental drone or something. I didn't want it in the log. The next morning, around 7:30, I got a call at home. Dispatch sometimes checks in early about mechanical issues, but this wasn't anyone I recognized. A guy claiming to be from the Coast Guard said they wanted to do a surprise safety inspection before the next run. They'd be on the dock by 10 o'clock. True to his word, they arrived in a black SUV with no Coast Guard markings. Two men in plain black suits and white shirts, wearing black ties. No clipboards, no tools, no IDs. One was tall and thin with almost greyish skin. The other was shorter and stockier, sporting these old-fashioned black glasses that looked like they'd been around since the 1950s. We docked at the island around 12:45, dropped off the passengers, and loaded up for the return trip. Everything seemed normal. When they arrived, they didn't shake hands or introduce themselves. They just asked to walk through the vessel. I thought maybe they were undercover, though something felt off. I brought them aboard. Eli hadn't arrived yet. In the wheelhouse, they didn't check the logs or even glance at the equipment. The tall one stood by the door while the one with glasses stared out the window. "You ever see anything unusual on these waters?" he asked. I said to define unusual. He turned and gave me a deadpan smile. I shrugged and mentioned sometimes you see stuff. Lights, shapes, things that don't belong. The tall one asked directly about the previous night in a way that felt like he already knew the answer. I lied and said it was a routine night. The short one stepped closer. "You sure?" he pressed, suggesting people can imagine things when tired. I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't imagine things." He didn't blink, didn't move, just held that intense stare. They then asked to see the lower deck. Again, no questions about safety equipment. They didn't check the engine room or look at anything mechanical. They just walked slowly along the edge, glancing out at the water. "Anyone with you last night?" the tall one asked. I told them Eli was on deck crew. Did he see anything? No. They nodded again. Something felt off. These two weren't really interested in what I witnessed. Their focus seemed to be on whether I would talk about it. We finished our walkthrough and returned to the dock. I asked about paperwork or signatures. The shorter one just smiled and said, "No need, just routine." Then they drove away in their SUV. I waited until they were gone before calling Eli. I warned him not to mention anything about the light. He agreed. Later that evening, during our next run, Eli brought binoculars. We scanned the water constantly. Nothing showed up. A couple nights later, after a 1 a.m. trip from the island, I noticed something strange with my truck. It had been moved just a few inches, barely off its usual line. My seat was adjusted lower. No signs of a break-in, nothing stolen, but the dome light wouldn't turn on when I opened the door. I checked under the dash, half expecting to find a trekker. Nothing. I hadn't seen those two men again. But for the next month, during every midnight run, I'd catch myself scanning the water. Not just for the orb, which I didn't expect to see again, but for any sign someone was still watching. It was a Thursday around 3:10 a.m. My shift at Brook Hill Medical runs from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we always restock crash carts at 3. That night had been unusually quiet, with no new admits since midnight. I was catching up on charting at the nurses' station in ICU 3 when the hallway lights started to flicker. Only the row past room 314 to the fire exit was affected. A short buzz, then back to normal. At first, I didn't think much of it. The building's old, and the ICU is on the 5th floor. We often get surges from the HVAC system, but then, about 10 minutes later, the flickering returned. This time it was longer, a slow dimming that faded in and out. A faint clicking sound emerged, similar to the hum you hear standing under a transformer. I walked toward the fire exit to check if a bulb was failing. Passing room 314, I noticed the blinds on the double doors were open. Mr. Dr. Garza, one of our long-term patients, was there. My patient lay intubated and sedated, unconscious yet moving, one hand raised toward the ceiling, eyes shut tight. The monitors showed nothing unusual. I watched his hand slowly fall back to the bed. A flicker of movement caught my eye through the window. Behind the unit, a small, restricted rooftop stretched out, a maintenance-only area covered in gravel, vent hoods, and massive metal HVAC units. During daytime, housekeeping sometimes props the door open to air out the linen room, but at night, it's typically just darkness. Something was up there. A shape stood perfectly still behind a vent stack, tall, narrow, like a person frozen in place. I initially thought it might be security doing rounds, but we never have personnel up there without reason. Stepping closer to the window, I studied the shape. No face was visible, but it stood clearly backlit by city lights reflecting off the cloud cover. The figure was unnaturally upright, head slightly tilted, arms hanging too straight, almost like a mannequin posing. Then the lights flickered hard. When they stabilized, the shape had vanished. I radioed the front desk. No one was on the roof. Security confirmed the access hatch remained locked from the inside. I didn't report what I'd seen, dismissing it as a possible hallucination from too many long nights. Yet something felt off. That section of the unit seemed colder. Other nurses joked about ghosts in the vents later, but I couldn't laugh. As my shift ended, I headed to the break room to clock out. Near the elevator's vending machines, a man stood out of place. His black suit was impeccable, his appearance catalogue-like, pale, precise. No badge, no scrubs, not looking like a doctor, rep or security personnel. Just standing, facing the elevators, a slim black folder under his arm. My pace slowed involuntarily. Something about him made my stomach drop. He stepped forward and said my full name without any introduction. I stopped and took the folder he held out. A single-page form was inside, printed on plain white paper. No official letterhead or hospital markings. The typed statement described an anomalous rooftop event between 2:45 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. on April 11th. The document stated that I, as the witness, agreed not to discuss any visual or auditory phenomena observed during that time with hospital staff, patients, media, or law enforcement. A signature line and space for date and time waited at the bottom. When I asked about its purpose, he responded in an unnervingly flat tone, "This is for the hospital's internal review. It will not go on your employment record. It is strongly advised that you cooperate." His words sounded like a script translated into English, precise yet unnatural. I noticed his tie pin, a circle with a line through it, not like any brand logo I recognized. I refused to sign without a supervisor present. He stood motionless, holding the folder, not blinking. After about 15 seconds, an elevator dinged and 2 people stepped out. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall toward the old records room. That afternoon, I showed the form to my supervisor. She seemed bewildered, insisting she knew nothing about internal reviews or rooftop incidents, and that all hospital forms go through admin. She took the folder, promising to follow up. The next night, she told me the folder was empty when she opened it. I haven't seen the man since, but occasionally, when I'm near the West Wing supply elevator, I feel watched from behind the old roof access door, and the lights continue to flicker, always in the same hallway, at the same time. My live stream at Devil's Bluff started like any other. It's a rocky overlook past Kingsfield, surrounded by dense forest. Locals have long talked about strange occurrences, unexplained lights, malfunctioning electronics. I run a small podcast called Signal Scan, drawing late-night AM radio enthusiasts and conspiracy followers. It's not hugely popular, but I have a dedicated audience who tune into my live sessions. It was a crisp April night, clear and cold after dark. I'd been building anticipation all week, teasing a midnight stream from the bluff. My gear was ready, a mic rig, external battery and laptop, all set up with a portable satellite dish to create a hotspot since cell service was non-existent. The stream started like any other. Grainy video and ambient conversation were part of the charm. Low light, fuzzy shadows, wind rustling in the mic. It was atmospheric. Around 12:30 a.m., I was mid-discussion about triangulation flight paths when something caught my attention. A faint sound, barely audible beneath the wind and static. A whisper, almost like someone breathing close to the microphone. When I paused and asked the chat if anyone else heard it, several viewers confirmed they had. Someone typed, "Play that back." On replay, the sound was unmistakable. A flat, mechanical voice saying, "Leave now." I tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about woodland pranksters. But privately, I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing moved, just rocks, brush, no animals, no footsteps. I continued streaming, letting viewers speculate. They tagged timestamps, coined the bluff voice theory. I played along. Entertainment is key, after all. But something felt off. Around 1:45 a.m., everything changed. The laptop froze completely, the screen remained lit, but no mouse movement, no keyboard response. Audio cut out, though the software showed no error. The hotspot still blinked, signaling connection. Then the laptop fan roared to maximum volume, sounding like an overheating machine, yet the metal casing remained cold. A low, static buzz emerged through my headset with no visible waveform on the recorder. I packed up quickly. The environment had shifted. The trees stood unnaturally still, and at the edge of my flashlight's reach, something dark seemed to be moving against the darkness. Something wasn't right. After my hike, I drove home to my basement apartment in Kingsfield, feeling uneasy the entire way back. The trail behind me felt strange, with an unsettling sense of being followed, not by footsteps, but by an inexplicable pressure that seemed to pause whenever I stopped moving. The next morning, I started processing the stream footage, and that's when things got weird. The file was exactly 2 hours long, but the last 30 minutes had vanished completely. No errors, no drop signals, just gone. The stream dashboard showed everything was normal, with chat timestamps intact, but the video cut mid-sentence. Around 3 p.m., an unusual knock came at my door. Typically, no one uses the front entrance of my duplex. I opened it to find 2 men in identical black suits and white shirts despite the cold weather. One wore round glasses. They looked serious and spoke with flat, newscaster-like voices. Mr. Stephen Pierce, the man with glasses, handed me a USB stick. "You'll want to back up your recording properly," he said. The other man commented on the audio quality, mentioning interference starting around the 147-minute mark. When I asked who they were with, they exchanged a look and cryptically suggested I reconsider the narrative. Before I could respond, they walked away. No car was visible, and by the time I reached the sidewalk, they had disappeared. Back inside, I plugged in the USB. The folder labeled DB Stream Final contained 2 full-length files, video and audio. What I found was unsettling. The files showed my entire stream, including the intro and whispers. But the last hour was different. Not missing nor blacked out, but replaced. My voice continued talking, but in an unnatural spliced-together monologue constructed from older recording fragments. I was working a contract gig down in southeast New Mexico, not far from the old radar tower outside White Oaks. My name is Dylan Carr. The tower, a Cold War relic fenced off and rusting, had been shut down for decades, but the land got approved for private development, so they brought us in to do soil cores and subsurface testing. It was late September, right when the desert heat drops off hard after sunset. Just me and 2 other guys were bouncing around in an old Dodge with a rig trailer hooked on the back. We were working long days trying to knock out as many drill sites as possible before the real cold set in. Our trailer was parked maybe 200 yards from the base of the tower. We weren't allowed past the fencing, but a few of our bore sites ran real close to it, within 50 feet. On the 3rd day out there, I was working a solo drill run while the other guys went into town to resupply. I'd done a dozen of these cores already. Drop the bit, pull out a few feet of soil, catalog it, mark any groundwater. It's boring work, to be honest, but I like being alone. Got my little radio clipped to the truck, lunch in the cooler, peace and quiet. That day I hit something solid at about 5 feet down. Not rock either, more like metal. Clean, not rusted. I pulled the bit back up, expecting to see it jammed, but it was clean. I ran a small hand auger down and scooped around whatever was in there. After maybe 20 minutes of work, I pulled up this shard. I don't know what else to call it. Maybe 5 inches long, tapered, maybe an inch wide at its thickest point, but totally smooth. Perfectly smooth like glass, but metallic. No seams, no markings, cold to the touch, even though it had just been under dirt in the sun. The weird part was, it didn't feel heavy. Not light exactly, but not right. Off. I cleaned it off, snapped a photo on my phone, and set it on the fold-out table next to my logbook. Later, I recognized something strange from earlier episodes strung together in weird ways. Chat responses that didn't match the questions. Dead air filled with forest sounds I never recorded. There was no static. No laptop freeze, no leave now, no panic in my voice. Just a calm, faked version of me wrapping up a normal show. I checked the metadata. Creation date that morning, author blank. No location tags, no editing software listed. I haven't done a live stream since. The area gets real quiet after dark. No traffic, no people, just wind through mesquite and the occasional coyote howl. I've been working the site all day, doing 2 cores before wrapping up just before sundown. We'd found some scrap from the old radar days, a few bolts, old cables, but this piece felt different, refined. No corrosion, like it hadn't aged at all. Back in the trailer, the generator hummed low, and the sky had turned black. I was halfway through heating a can of chili when someone knocked. No vehicle sounds, and the site was surrounded by gravel and scrub, impossible to approach unnoticed. I opened the door to find a man standing there. He was out of place, black suit, white shirt, shiny shoes, not a speck of dust on him. He didn't introduce himself. Instead, he looked past me and stated matter-of-factly, "You found something today." His voice was quiet, but cut through the generator's noise like a knife. Average height, pale, expressionless. I stared, then finally asked, "What are you talking about?" He nodded toward the table. "The object? May I look?" Somehow, I let him in. Something in his manner suggested I had no real choice. He moved slowly, hands behind his back, studying the shard without touching anything. After a minute, he straightened and said simply, "Some artifacts belong underground." Then he was gone. No goodbye, no name. I stepped outside, scanning the area, but saw nothing. No headlights, no engine, no sound. I checked the gravel road with my flashlight. No tire tracks. That night, I barely slept. I wrapped the shard in a towel and locked it in my toolbox. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps outside. But when I looked, there was only wind. Next morning, my co-workers returned. I said nothing about the man or the shard, working as if nothing had happened. Yet I kept the piece hidden in my truck's glove box. Part of me didn't want to let it go. We rented a Catalina 36 out of Crescent Harbor, just south of Ventura, for a family trip. Me, my wife Allison, and our daughter Grace, who had just turned 11, were looking forward to a peaceful 3-day sail up the coast. We planned to anchor near secluded beaches, away from internet and noise, just like the previous year. The marina provided us with a logbook, clipboard, and spare keys. I mapped out our route to San Miguel, then east toward the shoreline to anchor off Rafuio Beach. Our final stop was supposed to be just past El Capitan before heading back. The weather couldn't have been more perfect. Clear skies, light wind, smooth current, and sunny but not too hot. By the second night, we were anchored about 100 yards offshore west of Gaviota. I was brewing coffee on the stove while Grace scanned the horizon with binoculars. Allison was inside, struggling with a flickering cabin light, despite a full battery. Around 9:20 p.m., just past nautical twilight, Grace called out, "There's a star in the water." Initially, I thought she meant a boat light or satellite reflection, but when I looked, I saw a small white glow just above the ocean, almost level with the horizon. It wasn't moving, just suspended there, maybe 2 or 3 feet above the surface. The light was round but not sharp, with blurred edges like fog. I assumed it might be a drone from a research boat or something from the Navy base down south. But before I could say anything, the light started to rise. Not quickly, not slowly, just upward. Later, after the contract ended, I took a shard home and stored it in a drawer in my garage. About a week afterward, I returned from work to find my garage door wide open. Nothing was stolen or disturbed, except the drawer with the shard. It was open and empty. No signs of forced entry, no prints, no cameras, just gone. That same night, a business card appeared under my front door. No name, no number, just a black circle on white cardstock. I threw it away and haven't seen anything since. The water lapped steadily against the hull, and a steady breeze blew around us. We weren't talking, but not out of fear. It felt more like we were trying not to draw attention. The light hung perfectly still, maybe 50 feet off the water's surface. No blinking, no side-to-side movement. It just existed as if gravity didn't matter. Suddenly, the mast light dimmed slightly, and the cabin light went completely dark. I tried the switches and radio, but nothing responded. The power panel still showed charge, which was strange. The GPS screen turned grey with no signal. Even the emergency beacon test produced only a weak red blink before dying. What was odd was how the boat didn't feel dead. Electronics usually create a certain silence when they fail, but this was different. Grace asked to go inside, and Allison took her below. I kept watching the light. Eventually, it began moving slowly east along the horizon, staying low never more than 100 feet above the surface. I tracked it until it disappeared behind the coastal curve, which took about 3 minutes. 5 minutes later, everything powered up simultaneously. The cabin light flickered, the GPS reset, and the radio returned to its standby channel. No error messages, no logs of outages. Back at the marina the next afternoon, I didn't mention the incident to anyone. A tall man in a black suit, unusual for marina staff, asked for our logbook. He flipped directly to the second page without reading the front, glanced at the notes, and said, "You were west of Gaviota last night." When I nodded, he paused, then handed back our key fob with a cryptic comment, "Some voyages end before the dock." Later, I discovered something else peculiar. I've returned to the marina several times, and nobody recognizes the man. The regular office worker insists he's the only one who handles boat returns. At the time, I was out in the middle of nowhere south of Gainesville, Texas, mapping sinkholes for the State Geology Department. The late September days were dry and warm, with nights turning cool. I'd been working in a vast pasture, stretching out as far as the eye could see, miles of grass and scrub, punctuated by small hollows and depressions. Most were harmless, but some sinkholes could suddenly collapse, making my job critical, documenting and warning landowners. For days, I'd been driving my pickup along dirt trails, marking GPS points for each new discovery. One afternoon, a particular hole caught my attention. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across, but something felt different. The grass around its edges looked unusually thin and smooth, almost polished. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, I crouched down to inspect it more closely. That's when I first heard the humming. Low and constant, it wasn't what you'd expect from a typical sinkhole. Sitting quietly on the ground, I tried to distinguish the sound from the background noise insects, wind rustling through grass. But the hum was definitely emanating from the hole itself. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration you could feel through your boot soles. I pulled out my phone and recorded the audio. The sound was faint, but a steady drone was audible. Curiosity piqued, but not overly concerned. I assumed it might be related to natural gas. I took measurements, photographed the site, and marked it on my map, planning to report it to my supervisor later. That night, I camped near the pasture's edge. My old tent, a camp stove, and a cooler with food were my companions. The sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and brilliant. It was one of those nights that feels simultaneously quiet and heavy. Outside my tent, I listened intently for the hum, which seemed deeper and more persistent in the darkness. Around midnight, something else caught my attention, a faint crunch of tires on dirt. Freezing, I peered out toward the pasture. The moon was just a sliver, but enough to make out shapes. 2 ATV-sized vehicles were moving slowly and deliberately through the grass, their headlights off, heading directly toward the sinkhole. I wanted to call out or signal with my lantern, but something held me back. The air felt charged, as if my presence was somehow inappropriate. The vehicles stopped near the hole and 2 men emerged, dressed entirely in black. They looked like security personnel or federal agents, but something felt decidedly unofficial about their demeanor. 2 men in plain black suits and hats emerged near the sinkhole, moving with a deliberate, calculated rhythm. I crouched behind a tree, watching as they pulled out unfamiliar black devices with blinking lights and buttons. They began scanning the ground around the depression methodically. After several minutes, one of them knelt down and placed his hand near the hole's edge. The humming intensified briefly before cutting out completely, as if the site had suddenly gone silent. They exchanged hushed words, and then one of them approached my hiding spot. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. I stepped out slowly, hands raised to show I meant no harm. His eyes were cold and penetrating. When I explained I was mapping sinkholes for the state and described the strange humming, he remained uninterested. "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed," he stated firmly. His companion watched me intently as the man instructed me to go home and not return. That night I packed my camp feeling unsettled, like I'd accidentally stumbled into something beyond my understanding. During the drive back to Gainesville, I repeatedly checked my rearview mirror, half expecting black ATVs to be trailing me. I never reported the incident to my supervisor. The next day, when I returned with a coworker, the hole had vanished. The ground looked completely normal, no depression, no sign of disturbance. Even my phone's recording of the hum had disappeared, as if it had never existed. Months later, I still can't explain what I witnessed or who those men were. But one thing was certain. This was far more than just a routine sinkhole investigation. I was wiping down the counter when something caught my eye through the glass doors. A tiny point of light hovered about 50 feet from the entrance, near the parking lot's edge. It wasn't like a typical aircraft or drone light. This was different. Steady and unmoving. It hung near the tree line. At first, I thought it might be a reflection from a street lamp or headlights. But the lot was completely empty, and the nearest street lamp was a block away, too far to cast any light here. Still, the light remained. During my breaks and while restocking, I kept seeing it. What struck me as strange was how it stayed perfectly still. The light seemed dimmer than any normal source. Sometimes it appeared closer, sometimes farther, but never actually moved. It just hung there, almost like it was watching. Around 3:30 a.m., it suddenly brightened. For a moment I wondered if someone had left a flashlight or lantern outside, but when I looked, nothing was there. No car, No person, just me. Then the store's outdoor security camera blinked off. The interior monitors flashed static before returning to normal. I couldn't tell if it was a technical glitch or something more unusual, but it felt connected to the mysterious light. Curiosity got the better of me around 4 a.m. I put on my jacket and stepped outside. The early fall air was cold and damp. The parking lot still empty except for that persistent light. As I walked closer, it simply vanished. No dramatic fade or movement, just gone in an instant. I went back inside trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Probably just a weird light reflection or my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But something felt off. The next morning, after my 6:30 a.m. shift ended, I noticed a man standing just outside the glass doors. He was staring intently inside, wearing a black suit that seemed out of place in our casual town. His hair was neatly combed, his expression blank, like he was waiting for something. The parking lot remained empty except for my car and the delivery truck. I froze for a second, gripping my bag from the counter. I'd been working at the preserve for about 5 years, mostly doing quiet maintenance work, like fixing signs and clearing fallen branches. Nothing too exciting, just another morning with the sun just starting to rise and the air cool and damp. The world was waking up slowly, birds beginning their calls, leaves barely moving. I was halfway through replacing a faded directional sign near a cliff overlooking the valley, carefully watching my footing on the narrow trail. That's when I heard it. A low mechanical rumble, different from thunder, more like a distant engine. I looked up toward the steep cliff face to my left, and then I saw it. A black disc, smooth and wingless, sliding silently behind the rock. About the size of a small car, but moving in a way that made no sense. No typical flying motion, no wings or rotors, just that low rumble. It vanished behind the cliff so quickly that I could barely process what I'd seen. When I looked again, there was nothing. No sign it had been there at all. No footprints, no scuff marks, nothing. The forest returned to its quiet morning sounds. Just bird calls and stillness. I packed up my tools faster than usual, my heart still racing. This wasn't the first strange encounter I'd had. The night before, I'd seen a strange light in the parking lot and a man in black who stood watching me through the glass when I locked up. When I came to work the next night, everything was spotless. The light was gone. Security footage showed a blacked-out hour during the exact time I'd seen the light hover, and that man, standing silently in daylight, watching me leave like he was waiting for me to disappear. I returned to the trail early the next morning, hoping to understand what I'd witnessed the day before. The whole area around the cliff was now sealed off with yellow tape. A black SUV sat nearby, and a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stood watching the perimeter. When he saw me approaching, he nodded as if he'd been expecting me. "You can't go past here," he said quietly but firmly. I asked who he was and what agency he represented, but he didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out a card with a simple black symbol on a white background. No department name, no contact information. "Why is this area closed?" I pressed. He looked at me intently and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "There are things here that don't belong to this world. It's better if people don't come near." His face was completely serious, no hint of humor or jest. When I pushed further, he simply smiled. A thin, cold expression that didn't breach his eyes. "We take care of things that shouldn't be seen," was all he would say. From that moment, the section was officially off limits. My attempts to get answers from my supervisor went nowhere. Emails and calls were ignored, as if the entire incident had been erased from official records. Throughout the week, I kept returning to the taped-off area. The forest felt different, heavier, more oppressive. At dusk, I'd catch fleeting glimpses of shapes moving just beyond my vision. The black SUV remained a constant presence near the trailhead, always parked but seemingly empty. I never saw the suited man again, but the silence surrounding that place spoke volumes. Whatever was behind that cliff wasn't meant to be discovered. Some mysteries are better left unexplored, hidden from view, waiting in the shadows. Night shifts in Phoenix can be eerie, especially out by South Mountain where the roads stretch empty under a dark sky. That's where I used to drive a taxi, spending hours waiting for calls with a fogged-up windshield and the heavy desert air hanging still around me. This particular night started like any other. Around 11:30 p.m. a call came in for a pickup at a gas station near the 202. I expected the usual passenger, someone looking to get home or catch a flight. But the guy who slid into my back seat was different. Mid-40s, wearing a black suit that seemed borrowed or bought second-hand, with slicked back hair and dark sunglasses despite the nighttime darkness. He didn't say much at first. When I asked where he was going, he just mumbled about wanting to see the stars clearly. I saw something out there, he said, gesturing toward the desert. I suggested South Mountain, knowing a spot with an open view. As we drove, radio static whispered beneath the music, and occasional coyote howls broke the silence. 20 minutes later, we pulled onto a side road where city lights faded and the sky stretched wide and clear. He stepped out, staring upward. "You ever see anything you couldn't explain?" he asked. I shrugged, talking about normal nighttime scenes. But he was focused on something else, something he'd seen hovering over the rocks, silent and without lights. Before I could ask more details, he wanted to keep driving. We continued deeper into the desert, the road growing rougher and less traveled. Then, halfway through the journey, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. No passenger. I stopped, looked around, called out, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign he'd left the cab. Feeling unsettled, I headed home. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just another strange moment in a night that had already been anything but ordinary. I was out checking the cornrows late that night, just after sunset in southern Iowa. Early fall hung in the air, with a crisp edge that hadn't quite pushed away the day's lingering warmth. My grandpa's farm has been in the family for generations, and I take pride in keeping things running right. Standing near the old barn from the 40s, I noticed something strange. At first I thought it might be fireflies or a trick of light from the farmhouse windows. But then 3 perfect spheres emerged, rising slowly from the barn's roof. About the size of basketballs, they glowed with an eerie, steady light. Not flickering like a candle or anything natural. They hovered silently for maybe a minute, then drifted upward in unison, like balloons caught in a gentle breeze. But there was no sound, no wind, no movement in the leaves around me. They simply vanished into the dark sky, as if someone had flipped a switch. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I might be imagining things or wondering if it was some drone light show, but that was impossible. The farm sits miles from the nearest town, and nobody comes around this late except me or the occasional raccoon. Later that night, I was driving home when I noticed the black SUV. Headlights dimmed, it matched my speed perfectly, staying on my tail for miles. Sometimes it drifted just out of sight, sometimes close enough to see its darkened windows. I tried switching routes, taking side roads, but it followed. At one point, the SUV pulled alongside me, and the passenger window rolled down. A calm, steady voice said, "Don't circle back." Before I could respond, the window rolled up, and the SUV accelerated away, disappearing into the night. I drove straight home, constantly checking my mirrors, feeling watched. Since then, I haven't taken any rides out past the desert. The man in black never contacted me again, but every time I drive past South Mountain at night, I catch a shadow in the corner of my eye, wondering what I was shown that night and why I was warned never to go back. I woke up early, the strange events from the previous day still fresh in my mind. The morning dew was thick on the grass as I stepped outside to check the fields. Something felt off, a lingering unease from the night before when I'd seen those glowing spheres. At the edge of my southern field, a black pickup truck caught my eye. It wasn't familiar. No plates or stickers I recognized. 2 men in dark suits and polished black shoes stepped out, looking completely out of place in the muddy farmland. They pulled out folding rulers and started measuring the spaces between corn rows. I approached them, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" One of them looked up, his expression blank and unreadable. "We're here about your planting," he said firmly. I was confused. "Planting? I've been growing corn here for decades. It follows the land's slope." The second man spoke up. "Your rows are too irregular. You need to adjust your planting." I blinked, struggling to understand. "What exactly are you saying?" They exchanged a look as if I was supposed to grasp some hidden meaning. "Precision matters," the first man said. "Patterns need correction for safety." "Safety from what?" I asked, a cold nervousness settling in. They didn't answer. Instead, they packed up their rulers, got back in the truck, and slowly drove away, leaving tire tracks in the soft dirt. I watched until the truck disappeared down the gravel road, my mind racing. Later that day, I couldn't stop thinking about the glowing spheres and these mysterious men. The tire marks in the field were real, and my hands trembled when I touched the cornstalks. That night, I stayed inside with the porch light on, feeling like I was being watched. The wind was still, but every time I looked out the window, shadows seemed to move just beyond the tree line. I didn't tell Lisa. She'd probably just laugh it off. Some things are better left unsaid. I keep an eye on the skies at night, hoping to see anything, to make sense of it all. But the truth is, I still don't know what's going on with those spheres or those men in black suits, and I'm not sure I want to. A couple weeks have passed since that strange encounter. The noises in the shadows haven't completely disappeared, but they've become less intense. Something made me straighten out my crop rows, making them more uniform. I can't quite explain why. When I first discovered the changes in my field, I called my cousin Dave. He laughed, said I was probably just tired from working too hard. But I knew something was different. The crops looked drained, almost lifeless in certain spots. Some rows appeared flattened, pressed down, yet there were no footprints or vehicle tracks besides my own truck. Weird things started happening around the farm. The porch radio would buzz with static when no one was using it. My dog Buddy began growling at seemingly empty spaces and refused to go near the barn. At night, I'd hear soft tapping against the windows. But whenever I looked outside, only dark trees and empty fields greeted me. One evening, I went to the barn searching for answers. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and earth. Inside, the shadows seemed to swallow my flashlight's beam. I didn't see the mysterious spheres this time, but their absence felt tangible. Walking slowly through the field, I remembered the men in black with their blank faces. "Adjust your planting," they had said, more like a command than a suggestion. I'm still unsure what they meant or what might have happened if I hadn't complied. I was out in Joshua Tree for a couple days, just me and my camera. As a photographer who usually captures landscapes and street scenes, I wanted something different, something more off the grid. The desert murals on those old concrete walls near the trails had caught my eye. The abandoned location was colorful, with an eerie undercurrent that immediately caught my attention. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I set up my camera near a striking mural filled with twisted human figures and strange geometric patterns. The desert air was hot and dry, punctuated by occasional cool breezes that stirred dust around my boots. I started taking photographs, moving around to capture different angles and play with the fading sunlight. At first, everything seemed normal, but as time passed, something peculiar began to emerge. The shadows on the wall didn't behave like normal shadows. They shifted and changed independently, stretching in directions that made no sense given the sun's position. Sometimes shadows would vanish completely, even when their supposed source remained unchanged. Initially, I dismissed these anomalies as tricks of light or wall texture, yet after watching for nearly an hour, the shadows continued their inexplicable dance, bending and twisting, as if alive. That's when I noticed him. Dressed in a crisp black suit that stood out against the dusty landscape, he was standing near the mural's edge, watching me silently. When he approached, his movements were calm and deliberate. His age was hard to pinpoint, somewhere between 30 and 40, but his expression remained unnervingly blank. Without asking permission, he ran his fingers over the leather camera strap with its collection of pins from old shows and various souvenirs. "Some frames aren't for the public eye," he said quietly, his tone hovering between a warning and a threat. Then, in a moment that defied explanation, he turned and walked directly into the mural, not beside it or near it, but through the painted figures as if stepping through an invisible doorway. I blinked, stunned. No one could simply disappear like that. I called out, but only the wind answered, leaving me with nothing but questions and a growing sense of unease. I'd been tracking something strange near an old desert mural. After checking every possible hiding spot, I couldn't find the black-suited man anywhere. Back at my motel that night, I studied my photographs carefully. Subtle details emerged when I zoomed in, strange ripples and flickering edges in the shadows. My phone buzzed with random text messages from unknown numbers, which I quickly deleted. Weird tapping sounds kept coming from the motel window, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. The next day, I returned to the mural under a brutal sun that seemed to bleach everything around me. Two sets of footprints caught my attention, perfectly pressed into the dirt, leading right up to the mural wall and then vanishing as if whoever made them had simply stepped into the concrete. I traced the tracks back toward the highway, but found nothing unusual waiting. As evening approached and I packed my equipment, a car with black tinted windows and no license plates pulled up. Two men in business suits emerged. One walked directly to me, examined my camera strap intently and whispered, "Be careful with what you capture. Not everything should be recorded." His companion silently scanned the mural before they both returned to their car and disappeared, leaving only dust in their wake. Something felt different, like I'd inadvertently crossed an invisible boundary. The desert seemed to contract, the mural transforming from mere paint into something more mysterious and unsettling. Driving home in silence, the empty road stretched before me. Since that day, I've returned to my regular work, but I can't stop studying shadows, wondering what might be moving within them. Those photographs remain private, a secret I'm not eager to share. Some nights, I find myself on my apartment building's roof, sitting on an old bench, pondering what strange things might exist just beyond our perception. Some nights, the roof feels like my sanctuary. Away from the city's constant buzz, with just a few leftover cushions and my telescope, I find peace looking at the stars. The sky up here is different, clearer, quieter. Amateur astronomy has been my passion for years, and this particular discovery began on a late September evening. The air was cool and crisp as I arrived home early from work. After dinner, around 9:30, I hauled my telescope to the roof while darkness settled in. The stars were bright and sharp that night. I focused on Cygnus, the swan constellation, a longtime favorite. I'd been tracking its movements, and something felt off this time. When I lined up the telescope, a star cluster appeared displaced. About 10 DJ west of its usual position, I meticulously checked my charts and equipment. Other constellations remained exactly where they should be. Only this small group near Cygnus's tail seemed strange. The stars themselves looked normal, steady and bright, but their pattern was distinctly wrong. Thinking it might be an atmospheric anomaly or optical illusion, I watched for another hour. The cluster remained fixed in its unusual position. The next morning, I shared my observation with Leah, a geology student. She suggested it could be a reflection or light pollution, but her curiosity was piqued. The following night was cloudier, with low-hanging fog casting an orange glow over the city lights. Around 11 p.m., something else caught my attention. A black sedan parked directly across the street, engine off, barely illuminated by the streetlight. A lone figure sat inside, unmoving, for about 10 minutes. The street was quiet that night. The sedan sat motionless, and at first I thought nothing of it. Then the passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. His appearance was unremarkable, a dark suit, black shirt and tie, moving with a precision that suggested purpose. He wasn't flashy, but something about him felt deliberate, almost clinical. I ducked behind my telescope, watching as he looked up toward the building. Instead of approaching, he pulled out a small flashlight and aimed it directly at my telescope's lens. The light wasn't blinding, but it caught the lens perfectly, creating a dull greenish reflection. For about 20 seconds, he held the light steady, then abruptly stopped, closed the flashlight, and returned to the car. The sedan drove away silently, leaving the street empty. In the days that followed, I became increasingly unsettled. I kept scanning the street, watching for any sign of the car or the man. An oppressive feeling of being watched settled over me. The night sky seemed different. That cluster in Cygnus looked off, and something felt fundamentally wrong. Strange incidents began to accumulate. One night on the roof I heard footsteps behind me, but turning revealed nothing. A whisper seemed to drift on the wind, though only leaves moved on the fire escape. At work the next day, my phone died unexpectedly, fully charged the night before, now completely dead. Replacing the battery didn't help, it never held a charge again. The oddities continued. My laptop crashed. My neighbor complained about flickering Wi-Fi and strange static. I kept silent about the man and the car, not wanting to sound paranoid. But I couldn't forget his gaze, the way he aimed the flashlight, as if wanting me to see something significant. Late at night, I sometimes catch a shadow moving just beyond my perception. A reminder that something unexplained had entered my world. Night shifts at the freight yard always felt lonely. As a railway inspector for a small company in Cheyenne, Wyoming, my job mostly involved routine checks, verifying loads, examining cars for damage, ensuring everything met standards. That particular early October morning was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. Around 2 a.m. the yard was nearly empty, illuminated only by a few floodlights. I was walking alongside a long freight train parked on a siding, clipboard and flashlight in hand, moving between cars 23 and 24, when something caught my attention. A subtle metallic scraping sound came from above, like something dragging against the train's roof. I stopped and swept my flashlight upward, but the beam couldn't penetrate the darkness. The yard lights were too weak, and clouds obscured the moon. Then, unexpectedly, a dark shape moved along the train's roof, faster than any human could move. It wasn't a person, but something else entirely. Low and stretched out, it glided smoothly before vanishing like a shadow melting into darkness. My heart raced. I tried convincing myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a large bird. I scanned the area, but nothing appeared. The noise didn't repeat, so I completed my inspection and headed to the nearby diner. As it opened around 5 a.m., the usual early crowd filled the space. Truckers, railroad workers, and locals drinking coffee. I settled into a window booth, still unsettled by the night's events. As I ordered eggs and toast, I noticed a man at the counter watching me intently. Something about him seemed off. His black suit didn't fit quite right, almost as if it wasn't meant for him. Now standing here at the edge of the roof, I feel watched. The stars no longer feel like home. His suit was an off-the-rack number that never saw a tailor's touch. Too tight collar, slightly short sleeves, hair slicked back, face pale and blank. I'd been a drone photographer for just over a year, mostly shooting industrial scenes like oil rigs and construction sites. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and I enjoyed capturing perspectives others missed. This particular rig was off Louisiana's coast, a platform surrounded by water and supply vessels. He walked over and sat across from me without invitation, sliding into the seat. His movements were deliberate. 6 or 10 car lengths back? He asked quietly. I frowned, confused. What was he talking about? The shape I'd seen was at 6 or 10 car lengths back from where I was. I shook my head. I hadn't caught a specific distance. It was just above the cars. He leaned forward, intensity in his gaze. The exact position matters, he said. The exact position matters, he said. Who was this guy? He smiled, but it was cold and didn't reach his eyes. Just someone keeping an eye on things, he said. It's important you remember where it was. I tried to brush him off. I'm just a rail inspector. I don't know anything about shapes on roofs. He nodded as if he'd expected this response. Still, you need to be careful, he warned. Before I could respond, he stood and walked out. No one in the diner seemed to notice him. When I looked out the window, he had vanished. No car, no footprints, nothing. I finished breakfast and returned to the yard, but something felt off. For days, I checked the spot he mentioned. Nothing appeared. Sometimes I'd hear a faint scraping sound late at night, but it never repeated with that same strange pattern. I mentioned it to co-workers, but they laughed. Said I must have been tired or imagining things. But I knew what his visit haunted me. The way he spoke, how he seemed to know what I was talking about without explanation, it was unsettling. Why was he so interested in the exact distance of that shape? I never saw him again. Never figured out what was on those train roofs that night. Just something that left with questions I can't answer. I was filming on the Gulf during a late summer evening. My job was to capture twilight footage for a client, shooting from a supply boat's deck near an offshore rig. The weather was warm and calm, typical of the season. Halfway through the shoot, something caught my eye to the northeast. At first I thought it was another supply boat, but something seemed different. The object was a smooth, rounded shape, hovering quietly above the water. Using my drone, I circled to get a better view. It was about the size of a small helicopter, but completely silent. No blinking lights, no visible engines or rotors. Just a dark, rounded form reflecting the sunset's last light. After filming for a few minutes, I brought the drone back to the boat. As I did, the object slowly moved away, gliding smoothly over the open water. Later that night in my New Orleans apartment, I reviewed the footage on my laptop. The object was clear and perfectly focused against the dim sky, unlike any aircraft I recognized. I wondered if it might be an experimental drone or a weather balloon. Around 2 a.m., an unexpected knock came at my door. A man in his mid-30s stood there. Black vest, plain black shirt, dark pants. No badge, no identification. His gaze was steady and calm. "Mr. Carter?" he asked. When I confirmed, he immediately said, "We need you to delete the footage you took tonight for everyone's safety." Confused and half asleep, I asked who he was. He didn't answer. "That object you filmed above the rig can't be shared. Delete it," he insisted. I tried to understand, explaining I was just a contractor who didn't want trouble. I asked who he worked for, but he simply shook his head, offering no further explanation. I've spent nearly a decade tracking wildlife in the Pacific Northwest's dense forests. This work demands patience, reading subtle signs like broken twigs, hoof prints, and scattered scat to understand animal movements. The isolation suits me. It's just me, the wilderness, and whatever's passing through. During a routine tracking walk a few weeks back, something unusual happened. A man in black appeared, demanding I delete footage from my drone flight near an oil rig. His tone was unsettling, firm and authoritative, like someone unaccustomed to being challenged. I reluctantly agreed, but requested written documentation. He dismissed my request with an unfriendly smile and walked away. Back in my apartment, I stared at my laptop screen. The footage remained twilight's last moments, rig lights glowing, and a strange hovering object. My hard drive hummed quietly. I considered calling the police, but knew how bizarre my story would sound. Instead, I backed up the video onto a flash drive and tucked it away. The next day, I contacted the rig's security office. They reported nothing unusual that night, claiming routine maintenance with no strange sightings. When I asked around later, no one recognized the mysterious man. In subsequent days, strange occurrences multiplied. People watched me subtly at drone meetups. Phones died when I attempted to upload related files. Computers malfunctioned mysteriously. I stopped discussing the incident and kept the footage hidden. Whether he was private security, government personnel, or something else entirely remained unclear. What was certain was their intense desire to suppress this evidence. I never saw the man again, and the enigmatic object vanished from the recording. Now, I continue flying drones but maintain a deliberate distance from that particular rig. Something about that night left an indelible mark, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. The forest felt heavy that day, with an overcast sky pressing down on everything. I was hiking a trail I often monitored for deer activity, and the ground was soft from the previous day's rain, creating muddy patches along the path. Something caught my eye about an hour into my walk. In the middle of a clearing, there was a perfect circle around 10 feet across. The grass and underbrush inside were completely flattened, as if a massive object had rested there. But this wasn't like any animal bed I'd ever seen. The edges were unnaturally sharp, like a giant cookie cutter had sliced through the ground. No leaves or branches disrupted the circle's pristine surface. I knelt down to investigate, looking for tracks. Typically, animals leave some trace of their presence. Prints, drag marks, broken twigs. But here, nothing. The mud surrounding the circle looked untouched, as if whatever created this mark had materialized and vanished without a trace. Circling the area, I scanned for any signs of disturbance. The surrounding trees and bushes appeared normal, with only occasional snapped branches typical of a forest path. This wasn't like any deer or elk bedding area I knew. Those usually show clear signs of movement. Scraped ground, uneven flattening. This was different. Too precise. Too clean. I pulled out my phone to take some photos, hoping my animal tracking friends might offer insights. Just then, a twig snapped behind me. I looked up quickly. About 30 feet into the trees, two men emerged. They wore black suits that seemed more suited to a business meeting than a forest trail. No ties, no casual hiking gear. Their clothes looked stiff, their appearances crisp. Short, dark hair, clean-shaven, expressions serious. Neither spoke. One began methodically counting something along the circle's edge, silently pointing at various spots on the ground. The other stood watching. They didn't acknowledge me, and I found myself unsure whether to interrupt their strange investigation. They continued their precise counting, moving around the mysterious circle with an almost mechanical focus. I was out at the burned field before dawn, standing at its edge with my binoculars, scanning the perimeter for any signs of lingering danger. The fire from a week ago had left the land a mess. Charred, blackened dirt with brittle stalks poking out like broken bones. The whole place still smelled faintly of smoke, despite the rain from the night before trying to wash it away. Thick fog surrounded me that morning, so dense I could barely see past 20 feet. It was one of those silvery, damp mornings where everything feels muffled and quiet. I like these moments. No distractions, just stillness. We get called in often to check for potential reignitions. As the ground can stay hot in spots and wind can pick up embers, the circle appeared suddenly, catching my eye amid the desolate landscape. Later, two men in black suits walked into the burned field, moving silently between the fog and charred remains. Without a word, they turned and disappeared into the woods. I stayed frozen, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My phone confirmed the encounter. Pictures captured the mysterious circle and the men's sudden appearance and vanishing. At home, I searched everywhere for similar reports. Local news, hiking forums, wildlife blogs. Nothing matched my experience. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the circle and those men, feeling they were somehow connected. The next morning, I returned to the spot. The circle remained, but something had changed. The ground inside looked drier, less compressed, as if the forest was slowly erasing whatever had occurred. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. Footsteps stopping abruptly, an unfamiliar car parked a block away, shadows flickering at the edge of my vision. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination or typical forest activity, but doubt crept in. Whatever that circle was and whoever those men were, they left an unexplainable mark. Suddenly, the forest didn't feel like just a home for animals anymore. Something had shifted, and I was caught in the middle of a mystery I couldn't comprehend. Nothing, just a shadow moving above the field. It wasn't like any aircraft I'd seen before. Not a bird, not a plane, just suspended there. I blinked, and suddenly it took shape. A dark triangular form hanging about 30 feet off the ground against the pale grey fog. No sound, no engine noise, no wind rush. It just hung in the mist as if it belonged there. I stood frozen, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe a weather balloon? A drone? But nothing added up. No blinking lights, no propellers, no wings. Then it started moving. Slowly at first, sliding sideways over the burnt field, and then vanished. Just melted back into the fog without a whisper. I remained standing there bewildered. As the sun rose and the fog thinned, the field looked unchanged, charred and silent. I kept telling myself it was morning haze playing tricks, but something deep inside knew differently. Later that afternoon at the firehouse, I was still unsettled. Sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and some reports, a man walked in, sharp appearance, black suit, no tie, crisp shirt, polished shoes, dark hair slicked back, face angular and oddly blank, like he was studying me without actually seeing me. "Afternoon," he said quietly. No introduction, no explanation for his presence. Before I could ask anything, he moved to the window, gazing out toward the burned field. Without touching anything, he leaned in, carefully examining the scorch marks visible from our vantage point. Then he turned, locked eyes with me. "We appreciate your discretion," he said. I wanted to question him, but something about his presence made speech impossible. I just nodded. He spent a few more minutes scanning the room, as if seeing it for the first time, then left without another word. After his departure, my mind kept circling back to that triangular shape in the fog and how this mysterious man had appeared and vanished so silently. I haven't shared this with many people. Some stories just feel better left unspoken, like maybe someone might be watching. The weekend started like any other camping trip. I was seeking solitude in the San Juan Mountains near Lake San Rizal, hoping to escape the constant buzz of technology. It was early September, days still warm but nights growing chilly. My goal was simple: disconnect and enjoy some quiet time in nature. The first night passed without incident. I'd set up camp near the water's edge, with a clear view of the surrounding landscape. My old camera sat nearby, ready to capture scenic shots or interesting wildlife. Photography was just a hobby for me, nothing serious. As evening settled in, I sat by the fire after dinner, casually fiddling with my camera. That's when something unusual happened. Across the lake, near the tree line, a strange green light appeared. Unlike anything I'd seen before, it shot straight down from the sky in a clean line, vanishing at the water's edge. No sound, just a quick, bizarre flash. Intrigued, I quickly switched my camera to manual and snapped several shots, trying to capture this unexplained phenomenon. The next morning, fog blanketed the lake. Everything felt damp and eerily quiet. Half awake, I heard footsteps crunching through leaves behind my tent. When I looked out, a man stood near my cooler, completely out of place in these woods. He wore a full black suit and tie, hair slicked back, face pale and expressionless. "Morning," he said in a low, calm voice. Hey," I mumbled. Still groggy, he didn't respond or smile. Since that morning, I've avoided that area when fog rolls in. Late at night, I sometimes hear a low hum just beyond the edge of hearing. I can't explain what I saw or who that man was, but I'm certain it wasn't just a random occurrence. I was volunteering that summer at Cedar Hollow Park, a place where city sounds disappear and dense woods stretch in every direction. My camera had captured something unusual the night before, a green streak slicing through the darkness, sharp and almost luminescent. When I reviewed the photos later, the scene raised more questions than answers. A man approached me that morning, his movements deliberate and controlled. He nudged my cooler with his shoe and spoke quietly. "This area is under new management," he said, watching me carefully. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked what he meant. He simply looked at me, waiting for me to understand something unspoken. "We're here to make sure no unauthorized activity takes place," he continued. A small official-looking card appeared from his jacket, its seal barely visible in the dim light. My stuff was scattered where my cooler had tipped over, cans and a water bottle spilling onto the dirt. My stomach tightened with an undefined tension. After he stepped back, I wanted to ask more, but words failed me. The encounter felt surreal. His cryptic statement, his calculated movements. It was like he was communicating something significant without actually explaining anything. I packed up my camp quickly, avoiding direct eye contact. When I looked back down the trail moments later, he had vanished. During my hike back to the car, I kept examining the camera. The green streak was clear in the previous night's photos, but zooming in revealed something odd. Where the streak met the lake, the water looked unnaturally dark, a shadowy void with no ripples or expected splash. At a small town diner, I asked locals about strange occurrences near the lake. They casually mentioned occasional weird lights in the mountains, maybe ball lightning or gas emissions. No one mentioned anything about people in suits or new management. Back home, I checked the news. No crash reports, no search parties, no missing hikers. The lake appeared unchanged. I've returned to that area several times since, but the mysterious man never reappeared. I still can't explain the green light or why someone would declare the lake's management was changing. The spot remains quiet, surrounded by trees and mountains. Yet something about that night felt different, as if the place had subtly transformed, even though nothing visible had actually changed. I'd been working trail maintenance and visitor help for a few months, mostly during early mornings and late afternoons. That week I was on the night shift, helping rangers close up the station after dark, just keeping an eye on things, making sure no one wandered off the trails after hours. The night was clear and cold, with the moon hanging bright and sharp, casting long shadows through the trees. I had stayed late finishing paperwork after the last group left around 11 p.m. The park was silent, broken only by occasional leaf rustles and distant owl calls. Before locking up, I decided to stretch my legs with a quick walk down one of the lesser-used trails near the old oak grove. The air was rich with damp earth and pine needle scents. Moonlight filtered through branches in thin, pale strips. That's when I saw it. A smooth, almost perfect shape drifting silently between trees. It caught moonlight so sharply it looked like a floating mirror, reflecting everything around it. Branches, sky, the moon's faint glow. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't moving like any animal I'd ever seen. No wings, no legs. Just sliding slowly, smoothly, as if gliding on an invisible current. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It remained for about 20 seconds, drifting between trees before disappearing into shadows. I wondered if it might be a piece of trash, maybe a shiny tarp or loose sign. But nothing moved or flapped in the wind. It was completely silent and steady, almost alive, yet cautious. I pulled out my phone, but when I looked back, it was gone. No trace. I called out softly, but the woods swallowed my... I didn't want to follow it. Instead, I headed back to the station, feeling slightly on edge, but telling myself I was probably just tired and seeing things. The rest of the night was uneventful. I locked up, checked the gates, and turned off the lights. Just as I was about to leave, headlights cut through the trees at the far end of the parking lot. A black SUV rolled up slowly, stopping right near the ranger station. Its windows were darkly tinted. A quiet SUV rolled up with no license plate, the engine suspiciously smooth. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, dressed in a crisp black suit with a perfectly straight white shirt and tie. He looked clean-shaven, but somehow out of place, scanning the station before focusing directly on me. "You volunteer here?" he asked in a low, calm voice. I nodded, trying to sound casual, despite feeling unsettled from earlier events. He pulled out an unusual badge, a plain metal rectangle with unfamiliar letters. "I'm with a special agency," he explained. "We're taking over operations in this area." When I raised an eyebrow, he continued, "Effective immediately. You're to file your reports elsewhere." I was confused. "What reports?" He seemed to sense my uncertainty, tapping a folder under his arm and asking about any unusual encounters or observations. I stammered that I hadn't seen anything, which seemed to satisfy him. "Stay clear of the old oak grove at night," he instructed. "No more volunteers allowed past closing hours." Before I could respond, he returned to his vehicle and disappeared down the road, leaving me alone under the moonlight. The next day, everything had changed. The park office was stripped bare, no paperwork, no files. The rangers acted normally, but new signs blocked the old oak grove, declaring it a restricted area after dark. I kept silent about the mirrored object and the mysterious man, knowing no one would believe me. Questions lingered in my mind. What reports was he talking about? What were they so desperate to hide in those trees? The encounter haunted me, a cryptic interaction that left more questions than Lately, when night falls, I find myself glancing toward the oak grove, wondering if that strange silver shape will reappear drifting silently through the branches. But it never does, leaving me to question whether it was ever really there. That night on the highway crew near Cedar Creek was unlike any other. It was late spring, with chilly nights and a sky blurred by thin, low-hanging clouds. We were fixing a frost-damaged road stretch, our truck's bright floodlights turning the night into an artificial day. Our crew was small: me, Jay, Marcus, and our foreman Steve. We'd been rotating night shifts for weeks, so the routine was familiar. Typically these shifts were monotonous, just jackhammers and humming lights. But something felt different that night. Midway through our work, I spotted a shadow moving swiftly overhead, passing across our lights. It wasn't like any bird or aircraft I'd seen before. Disc-shaped and completely silent, it caught my attention immediately. I pointed it out to Jay, our group's skeptic, who stopped mid-sentence to watch it drift across the sky before disappearing behind distant trees. We joked about it being some unknown drone, but none of us had heard of anything like that in the area. Work continued, yet an unsettling sense of being observed lingered. Around 2 a.m., the air grew colder and clouds thickened. While stacking cones near the road's edge, headlights suddenly cut through the fog. A black rental pickup pulled up slowly beside our equipment truck. Steve approached, squinting through the mist. A man emerged, dressed in an oddly perfect black suit, the fabric unnaturally stiff and matte. His shoes made no sound on the gravel, and he stood silently staring at us. Then he pulled out a small handheld scanner, waving it over our helmets as if conducting some kind of check. It beeped quietly a few times while scanning me and the others. "Your shift's moved," he said, his voice completely flat. Steve frowned, his tone almost mechanical. "Pack up," he said. A man with a cold, detached demeanor responded, "No longer your jurisdiction." He looked around, expectant, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Orders come down, effective immediately." Steve unfolded the document. From the dim light, I could barely make out the words, but Cedar Creek Project and a bold red confidential stamp were clear. The rest was hard to read, mentioning a temporary halt and reassignment to an unfamiliar location. I asked, "Who sent you?" The guy stared at me for a long second, his look suggesting I wasn't supposed to be there. "You won't get more details. New instructions will come," he said. He turned and walked back to the truck. The engine was running before he even sat down. Headlights blinked once, and the vehicle vanished into the fog as suddenly as it had appeared. We stood in silence. Steve crushed the paper in his hand. Jay broke the quiet. "That's the weirdest shift I've seen." Marcus nodded. "You sure this isn't some kind of prank?" I wasn't convinced. The guy moved oddly, like he didn't belong. His eyes were too cold, and that scanner was unlike any equipment I'd seen on a job site. We packed up, but something felt off. Loading tools, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting those lights or that shadow to reappear. The night remained quiet. When we left, the road behind us was empty, as if nothing had happened. The next day, no one mentioned the shift change. Steve called the dispatcher, who claimed the schedule was unchanged and the project was still active. We tried returning that night, but the worksite gate was locked. New official signs warned of restricted access for safety reasons. The entire area felt sealed off, with no explanation. Weeks later, I ran into a former co-worker at the county office. When I asked about Cedar Creek, he hesitated. Some people noticed strange lights out there, but nothing official. It's all hush-hush now. That's all I learned. I don't know what the shadow was or who that suited guy worked for. But I know our shift ended that night, whether the paper said so or not. My name is Carl Jensen, and I work in forestry for the state, monitoring tree health and environmental conditions. On this particular midweek morning, I was out in a section of ponderosa pines near Flagstaff, Arizona, an area that had been closed off due to wildfire risks. The morning was cool and clear, with a light breeze rustling the pine needles overhead. As I hiked towards some sensors I'd installed weeks earlier, something unusual caught my attention. Around 9 a.m., a deep, steady, vibrating hum filled the air, unlike any machine sound I'd ever heard before. I paused, scanning the forest around me. The hum seemed to originate just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 50 yards away. Suddenly, a smooth, dark shape slipped silently between the tree trunks. It wasn't a distinct form with edges or seams, but a black mass that almost reflected the sunlight filtering through the forest canopy. The shape moved with an unsettling fluidity, gliding rather than walking or rolling. As quickly as it appeared, it vanished behind a thick stand of pines. Something felt off. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, with bird calls and wind sounds mysteriously muted, as if the entire woodland was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to investigate, but another part warned me to stay put. I hesitated, then continued my work, checking the sensors and recording their readings. Yet the dark shape lingered in my thoughts. By lunchtime, I was back at the small ranger station. While eating my sandwich in the break room, a strange man entered. He stood out, clean-shaven with short black hair slicked back, wearing a plain black uniform without any identifying patches, logos, or name tag. The dawn was soft and fragile, the sky barely beginning to lighten over rural Vermont. Moisture from the previous night's rain hung heavy in the air as I stood frozen, unlocking the back door of the wildlife rehabilitation clinic where I work. A weird streak of light sliced across the sky, too fast and straight to be any plane or bird. That day began strange and only got stranger. A man in an outfit more suited to government agents or security personnel approached me at my table in the forestry office. He didn't ask permission before sitting down, which immediately put me on edge. No one else seemed to notice his sudden presence. His gaze swept over my equipment, GPS, handheld weather meter, and various measuring tools. Equipment calibration, he said quietly but firmly. Are your instruments within acceptable parameters? I was confused, but answered that everything seemed fine. He leaned in and cryptically warned, "It's important to maintain accuracy. Deviations can lead to unintended consequences." Before I could ask what he meant, he vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. The rest of the afternoon felt off kilter. My GPS showed inexplicable jumps, briefly shifting my position by dozens of feet in an instant. The weather meter fluctuated wildly for no apparent reason. That deep, faint hum returned, just beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught another glimpse of a dark shape sitting motionless on a rock, almost camouflaged in the shadows. The moment our eyes met, it disappeared into the trees. I told no one about the strange man or the shape. What could I even say? But something had changed. Since that day, I've noticed odd lights flickering between the pines at night. Sometimes that low hum returns, even when no equipment is running. I can't shake the feeling that the man was either warning me or checking on something I was never meant to see. One thing is certain. This forest is far from ordinary. The morning had started with something unusual. A bright streak slicing across the sky, razor-sharp and silent. No blinking, no sound, just a clean line that seemed to interrupt the morning's calm. I brushed it off as morning grogginess, but the image lingered as I entered the clinic. Everything felt off when I reached the cage room. Every single door stood wide open, something that never happens. I'm always careful about securing these doors before leaving, and the animals weren't the type to escape on their own. Strangely, they were all still inside, quiet and undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no damage, just open doors. I checked the security cameras later, hoping for an explanation. Maybe a clever raccoon or an accidentally jarred door. But the footage showed nothing unusual, no movement at all during the night. It was too early to call the other staff, so I quietly locked everything back up. Yet a persistent feeling of being watched stayed with me throughout the day. When I was closing up that evening, a man appeared outside the clinic entrance. He looked out of place, wearing a perfectly fitted black suit, straight out of the 1950s with shoes so polished they seemed to gleam. He stood silently, holding out a keyring with a small white tag that read, "Do not use." His face was blank, revealing nothing. I tried to ask who he was and what he wanted, but he simply shook his head. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the empty street, vanishing into the twilight. I was left holding the keys, completely bewildered by the encounter. I'm Len Ortiz, and chasing lightning has been my obsession for years. As a photographer, I'm drawn to that raw energy slicing through the sky. One humid evening, I was out on the town's edge, waiting near a dirt road where power line pylons stretch across an open field. Something felt different that night. The air was unnaturally thick, and an eerie silence hung everywhere. No crickets chirped, no wind stirred the grass. Just heavy, oppressive quiet. I stood with my camera ready, watching the clouds darken, anticipating a good lightning strike. When the bolt finally came, it was sharp and close. I snapped the photo and lowered my camera. That's when I saw it. Between two pylons, a dark shape flickered, a perfectly round silhouette shifting like a shadow between the metal towers. I blinked, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. A trick of light? A drone? A bird? Zooming in on my camera screen confirmed what I'd glimpsed, faint but clear. A round shape hovered near the power lines. The lightning had illuminated it, and it looked solid, not a reflection or lens flare. My heart raced, though I tried to convince myself it was just a weather balloon or camera glitch. 2 days later, while editing photos at a downtown cafe, that image kept pulling me back. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with an untouched keyring nearby, strange memories resurface. Sometimes at dawn, when the light hits just right, I could swear I see something moving outside. A shadow. A figure in a black suit watching from the tree line. The next morning, after that night, everything at the clinic seemed normal. No open cages, no missing animals, but the do not use label on my hand still glares under the streetlight, and I still don't know what to do with it all. I sat alone in a corner of the quiet cafe with just a few regulars around. A man in a plain black suit walked over and sat down opposite me without a word. No fancy details, no tie, just a simple suit. He spoke quietly, his voice calm but with an unsettling intensity. "I see you've been photographing the storm near the pylons." Before I could respond, he grabbed my laptop and printed a black and white copy of the photo with the dark disk. He slid the print across the table. "If you decide to share this image, consider framing it differently," he said, staring directly at me. Then, as suddenly as he arrived, he stood up and walked away. I was left bewildered. Looking down at the print, I noticed something new. The disc-shaped silhouette was even more pronounced in black and white, with subtle distortions around it, like the air was bending or shimmering. Strange occurrences began to pile up. My phone started dropping calls inexplicably. GPS would glitch, showing me in locations I'd never been. Men in plain black clothing began appearing at the edges of my vision, blending into crowds but always watching. One night, hoping to understand what I'd witnessed, I went out to photograph lightning. The storm rolled in, wind picking up. As lightning flashed, I glimpsed the disk again near the pylons, but it vanished when I raised my camera. I left quickly, feeling uneasy. The next morning, a small envelope lay under my door. Inside was a grainy Polaroid taken from outside my apartment window. My reflection was visible, and behind me, a faint shadow of a man in a suit. No explanation, no note. The sensation of being watched grew more intense. Eventually, I stopped sharing anything about what I'd seen. I'm Jack Mullins, lighthouse keeper on Cape Elmore for the past 5 years. It's not glamorous work, but I appreciate the solitude. That night, the storm was brutal. Hammering rain against the windows and wind howling like it wanted to tear the whole structure apart. Like any other stormy evening, I was in the small kitchen area watching waves crash beneath the lighthouse. I logged wind speeds and visibility while the radio crackled with static weather reports. Around midnight, when the storm reached its peak, I stepped out onto the balcony for a routine check. That's when I saw something strange, initially just a faint glow over the water, bobbing with the waves. But it wasn't a boat or buoy. The light was too steady, too intentional. It moved beneath the waves and resurfaced, almost like it was swimming. I blinked, thinking the storm might be playing tricks on my eyes. Yet the glow remained, moving slowly and deliberately. There were no engine sounds, no visible silhouette. Just a soft, eerie light pulsing in the dark, stormy sea. It felt like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. When I tried to call it in, the radio only produced scratchy static. No response. I stood watching that light dip and rise with the waves until it gradually faded as dawn approached and the storm began to subside. The next morning was calm, with clear skies and an almost peaceful ocean. Weeks passed. The strange occurrence lingered in my mind. I kept photographing storms, hoping to capture something similar, but nothing ever reappeared. Some things, I realized, don't want to be seen. Some images aren't meant to be shared as they are. Men in black seemed to be watching me afterward. They never directly confronted me again, but I could feel their eyes whenever I went outside. Unexplained glitches continued, leaving me with more questions than answers about what I had witnessed that night. The summer of 1994 had been quiet at the Tanoba test range. I was 38, an E6 radar technician with 17 years of service, mostly handling maintenance and diagnostics. Occasionally, I'd monitor late-night flights when extra eyes on the scope were needed. That October Tuesday was different. The weather had just started to cool off, and we'd been told to expect classified testing near Groom. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was in my usual routine, cleaning lenses and logging storm details when something unexpected happened. Around noon, 2 men appeared at my door. They looked straight out of a 1950s detective film. Black suits, black ties, shiny shoes, no introductions. One held my logbook while the other stared silently. They methodically flipped through the pages, circling specific dates in red ink, including the previous night's entry about a glowing orb. "You're advised to exercise discretion," one said quietly, his tone calm but laden with unspoken meaning. When I pressed for explanation, the other man simply added, "Some nights are better left unrecorded." As quickly as they'd arrived, they vanished down the gravel path toward the main road, leaving an unsettling silence. I examined the logbook again. The red circles weren't random. They marked entries spanning weeks and months, highlighting moments I'd previously dismissed as odd. Since their visit, strange occurrences multiplied. The radio crackled with inexplicable static. Fleeting lights danced over the sea. Shadows flickered across walls, but each time I considered speaking up, their warning echoed in my mind. Now I continue logging events, carefully avoiding those marked nights. Some stories, it seems, are meant to remain unwritten. We tracked certain aircraft through Tanopa's radar system, following strict protocol, log and report, no questions asked. These were black project operations, and you quickly learn not to dig deeper. That night, Daniels and I were in the radar control van, running a standard systems test around 2 a.m. We were checking sweep ranges and looking for ghost returns when something unusual caught my eye. A single radar return suddenly appeared on the screen's edge, right at Groom Lake airspace. No transponder, altitude reading 30,000 feet. Initially, I assumed it was a technical glitch. Those happen sometimes when equipment overheats during long sweeps. But before I could reset the system, the blip moved in an impossible way. One moment it was at 30,000 feet, the next it was at ground level, smack in the middle of restricted airspace. Daniels leaned over, questioning if it was a radar skip. I knew it wasn't. The return had substance, weight, signature depth, Doppler reading. This wasn't noise or a natural phenomenon. It had structure. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished from the scope. We ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. Power was stable, no magnetic interference. I pulled the signal log from the previous half hour and ran it again. The result was the same. One clear high-altitude hit, then an immediate drop to ground, then nothing. Daniels remained silent, staring at the blank screen. We logged it as a low-priority transient anomaly with no associated flight plan. The next morning, 2 civilian contractors arrived. An older man with salt and pepper hair, lacking a name badge, asked me to detail what I'd seen. I walked him through the entire incident, showing my printouts. He seemed unsurprised, simply nodding and muttering that it was consistent, as if this were a familiar occurrence. Then he requested I delete the signal logs. When I explained I couldn't do so without an official order, he produced a pre-signed Department of Defense form with a red header, authorization code. I deleted the logs. 3 nights later, walking between the van and the comms building around 300, the cold was piercing, maybe low 40s, and everything was dead quiet. The kind of silence that rings in your ears, no wind, no bugs, just absolute stillness. Looking out past the perimeter fence toward the south end of the range where Groom Lake airspace technically begins, I saw a light, bright white, hovering maybe half a mile off the ground. No blinking, no movement, just suspended there. It wasn't a plane. We had flight bands in place during that window. I stood watching for about 20 seconds before it started rising slowly, vertically. No sound. Then it disappeared. Not faded, not flew away, just gone. The next morning, Daniels handed me a sealed envelope. No name on it, just my clearance level. Inside was a short memo stating my Tanopa assignment had ended early, effective immediately, and I was being rotated back to Nellis. No reason given. Later that week, the same radar van was taken offline for calibration. When it came back online, the memory storage had been swapped, and all signal archives from that night were gone. I didn't say anything after that. I knew better. I packed up that afternoon, didn't see Daniels again after that. Don't know if he stayed or got moved, too. Years later, long after I retired, I requested my service records out of curiosity. The Tanopa assignment was listed, but the radar logs for that week were missing. Whole stretch blacked out. I still remember the way that blip dropped. 30,000 feet to zero in less than a second. No arc, no trail, just there then not. The moment caught me completely off guard, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Something so unusual that it has stayed with me, etched into my memory with absolute clarity. Even now, years later, the memory remains as vivid as the day it happened. No other moment in my life has quite matched the sheer uniqueness of that singular event.